we talked about yesterday, as an admissibility problem itself as to the underlying science, but a question of the applicability to the facts.
Actually, based upon the testimony, I have supplemented the original motion again this morning, and I now do believe that there is both concerns, both the Daubert sort of admissibility issue, as well as the earlier concerns, most of them that I had originally outlined. The reason is this. The gist, and I do have a copy for the court of the deposition from last night. I got an electronic copy mailed to me. This is part 3 of the witness's deposition. And essentially what we have now done from the state's perspective is we have moved from the witness initially creating the exhibit that he said represented essentially the physical evidence as well as things he gathered from police reports and witness statements. Now, what changed since the last portion of the deposition, which is what resulted in the production of the animation I received yesterday, is that we have now taken the animation and attempted to fit it to the theory of an expert who has yet to actually testify about it. So we have now gone from, and that's the reason that the state now believes that there is now a Daubert issue, because we have now moved from simple representation as to physical items to now attempting to create essentially a animated, I don't know if you want to call it a cartoon, but an animated depiction of the theory that that Dr. Di Maio discussed with this witness on the phone on Saturday after Mr. Shoemaker had been deposed twice, but right before Dr. Di Maio's deposition. At least that's according to the timing that Mr. Shoemaker told us last night. So because of that, because of what came out in that deposition that I'm glad the court authorized last night, I do now think that we need to expand this hearing to include Daubert materials, and I do have some cases that point that out why, but whether we call it a Daubert or Fry hearing, a combination Daubert, Fry, Pierce hearing, I think that all those issues now need to get fleshed out based upon the reasons for this change and what they represent. And I filed a supplemental motion this morning accordingly. I would also point out, during last night's deposition, the witness indicated that he had prepared additional still depictions and also showed me or displayed a computer diagram, indicated I was going to be getting copies of that. I got the court reporter's promised transcript, but I have gotten nothing yet from the witness. So I still don't have those physical things to hand to the court to show you, but that is the reason for the supplemental motion, and I apologize for now telling the court that we do want what I hoped wasn't necessary yesterday, but given what was said last night, I believe it is.
Okay, defense response?
A factual response first, I guess, is probably appropriate, and that is that the concern evidenced by the state through various paragraphs in the supplemental motion basically address the one fact issue that is in fact undisputed, and that is that Dr. Shipping-Bow and our expert as to the medical examiner, the pathologist, is that the gun shot entered Mr. Martin at approximately a 90-degree angle from the plane of the chest and somewhere close to a straight through shot. There is a little bit of angling as it enters the body off dead center line, but there's no dispute as to that underlying fact. It is that underlying fact that led to what I believe to be, if I understand the motion, the state's concern, and that is that Mr. Shoemaker, who had attended to the making of the animations for the last several weeks, all of which up to the last couple of days the state has been well aware of, deposed, and given copies of, in consultation with Dr. Di Maio, added to that fact the potential of the distance from the gun to the body. Testified in part by Dr. Bow in that he said the only distance he would give is somewhere between 0.4 inches and 4 feet. The anticipated testimony of Dr. Di Maio, as was referenced in his sworn testimony, is that it's somewhere between 2 and 4 inches. So we have prepared an exhibit to document that. Because of the lateness of concern and the state's concern over that, I'm very fine with not using that still. It's not part of the animation, but that still. I think I can probably use it in closing as a demonstrative tool. I don't think that's necessary for the court's consideration as far as evidence. So that's withdrawn. And I mentioned that to the state a moment ago. It's why I stood up at the bench when he was talking, just to make sure that that was clear, because it was just discussed last night. That leaves the underlying fact that the state seems to suggest is a concern, and that is the positioning of the bodies when the shot was fired. We know the relative positioning of the gun and the body at 90 degrees. So then what's not known, and what is depicted in the animation as the probable positioning of the bodies based upon John Good's testimony, is what I guess is an issue. And that is that if you keep the body and the gun together, maybe 2 or 4 inches, but for purposes of me talking to you, let's just put it up against, but certainly if Mr. Martin was like this, or even maybe the state could argue like this, although John Good has it about like this because he has him mounted over him and leaning over him, that is what we had used John Good's specific testimony and the only eyewitness testimony as to the relative positions when he saw it. Now, I'll tell you, the state's going to say, well, he didn't see the gunshot. He left a few seconds before, so there could have been movement. And I think that goes to something the state can argue to the jury. They can even have decided to come up with their own animation with something different, or their own expert to suggest something different. They haven't, but they could have. So I think that it's reasonable for us, based upon the evidence, particularly John Good's testimony, and Shipping-Bow's testimony and the anticipated testimony of Dr. Di Maio, that we have an animation that has the bodies in that position. They can certainly suggest what they want to, but I don't believe, and I've never seen, that evidence admissibility is dependent upon it not having some argument to the jury that it may have happened differently. Every witness who came in and gave testimony, whether it be Mr. Shoemaker, Dr. Di Maio, Dr. Bow, or anybody else, is up for impeachment before the jury. So I don't understand now why that makes it a Fry or Daubert admissibility concern when we know that animations are very admissible and often used more in civil cases, but criminal, but also in criminal cases. Pierce was a criminal case. And as long as it does, based upon facts adduced at trial, which this is, and can assist the trier of fact, which I think it can, and not to mention the fact that it is specifically in line with the facts of the evidence and supports our theory of the defense as to how things happened, and there's nothing to contest it. I don't believe if we were to go through a Daubert, Pierce, Fry standard, it would meet admissibility, so maybe we need to do that now. But the underlying facts are supported by the evidence, so I'm not certain. While I see the state is saying they talked, but they didn't talk and come up with anything different than John Good testified to. So I'm not certain what their true objection is to the admissibility of it, because what they're saying is now it's just based upon what we talked about. Well, no, it's based upon the 90-degree angle, and that's the one underlying undisputed fact that is the premise for the positioning of the parties. Now, as to the entirety of the animation, since I guess we're talking about all of it, what you'll see, and you really need to take a look at it, so we'll present it to you in a moment, what you'll see is it is more than an animation, it's more like a series of stills, because in response to states' concerns in the past, we took out animation and replaced it with a still. For example, there was movement of the arms in one shot, and there was 8, or there were 10, or there were 4, or there were 30.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if we were just to start with the hearing, and then you can give
Sure.
the argument after the hearing. So the defense has the burden. So call your first witness.
Call Daniel Shoemaker. We'll take a moment to get his hardware set up so we can show it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you solemnly swear from the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Now, I begin by pressing you just on the lectern.
Yes, you may.
State your name, sir,
Daniel Shoemaker,
and your business address.
1630 North Main Street, Walnut Creek, California, 94596.
And the name of your company.
Contrast Forensics.
And what type of business is that?
Crime scene accident reconstruction. I take a lot of different information. I take coroner's reports, accident, crime scene reports, photographs from the scene. I take my own measurements and my own photos, total station data, which is a survey of the scene. I take all that information and put it into context in the reconstruction of a crime scene.
Okay, well, let's back up a little bit and talk about how you got into this business to start.
Initially, it started from doing information graphics for Fortune 500 companies.
And tell me the time when that began.
It was 26 years ago.
Okay, and who'd you work for and what did you do?
I worked for Viewcom Systems in Independence, Ohio, and it was, we did corporate presentations and information graphics for all the tire companies in Akron. They also had an office up in Troy, Michigan, and we did all the information graphics for the car companies up there.
I'm presuming this is in the days even before PowerPoint, right?
It was days before desktop computers, a lot,
Okay.
mostly.
So back then, we're talking about a lot of art graphic work and just poster presentation, is that correct?
We had a sophisticated computer, it was called Imaginator, and it did slides.
And how long were you with that company?
I was with the company for about 5 years.
And what was your position with the company?
Senior artist.
So in effect, then, you would take on a project, create the graphics and the presentation tools in order to present that to an audience?
Yes, and work with the client on any modifications and all the information that went into it.
Did you have any formal education in this area before you began working for that company?
I have a Bachelor in Fine Arts.
If you would just tell the court what the focus of that was and how that assisted you in beginning your career in this type of work.
That ran the gamut for advertising and marketing and corporate identity, covered all those bases.
And you focused your career then on sort of, at that point, the graphic presentation of ideas to audiences?
Yes, the best way to communicate to an audience various ideas and procedures.
And that was done for approximately 5 years?
Yes.
And then where'd you go from there?
I went from there to California. I did basically the same thing in California for a lot of the companies in the Bay Area. And
Was that sort of on a contract basis, or were you working for a particular company?
worked for a company. I was senior artist there.
And what company was that?
Dolphin Multimedia.
Similar job description, that you would sort of take on a project and figure out how to best present it?
Similar job as in Ohio. But being in the Bay Area, you had a lot more access to more up-to-date software, more up-to-date technology in that area.
Being close to Simi Valley helps, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the court, was there any difference in what you'd done for the first 5 years to what you had done now when you're in California doing this type of work?
The main difference between then and now is doing a lot of information graphics for proposals, large government proposals. So I do two types of work. I do information graphics for government proposals, and then also I do the information graphics and crime scene reconstruction for attorneys.
And going forward then, from how long were you doing this type of work in California? Is that what you're still doing today?
That's what I'm still doing today.
So how long have you been doing this type of work in California?
It's been the last about 13 years.
And have you been doing that under Contrast Forensics, or has the name of your company or consulting group changed at all?
It's gone from contrast design to contrast forensics.
What is your role with the company?
Owner, sole proprietor.
You're it?
I'm it.
Okay. And over the past 13 years, have you explained to the court the type of work that you focused on, particularly in the area of, as you said, the courtroom work or the forensic side of it?
It initially started out by working with attorneys on designing their information on how best to communicate to the jury. Corporate presentations were at a certain level, and courtroom presentations were a bit below that. So I worked with attorneys on that. It's gone from information graphics for attorneys like that to drawing crime scenes, and the sophistication of the work in the crime scene has progressed quite a lot, to the point with the equipment that I have that I'm using now.
Okay. So if you would bring us along a little bit as to the progression, how it happened, what type of software or hardware was available to you 13 years ago when you started, and then sort of if you could progress us up through what you utilize today.
Back then, it was mostly just drawing out a scene. You go out and measure the crime scene, and then you draw it out on the computer to scale and accurate. And it was mostly 2D. From then, it's gone more into 3D, to the point where 3D reconstruction and also the software has gotten a lot more sophisticated with accident and crime scene reconstruction software.
Back 13 years ago, then, did it sort of start with you going out to a scene with a tape roller, where you would go from one point to the other and get a measurement, or how
Yes.
was it back then?
It was just hand measuring like that with a metal tape ruler.
And without going through everything in between, what type of software and hardware is available to you and do you use in your business today?
The software that I use, I have two kinds for using my total station data. I use software called ARIS 360. That's on the cutting edge of taking total station. ARIS 360.
Can you spell that?
ARAS,
Thank you.
and it's just the number 360.
Um,
That's what.
I want to make sure that we sort of start with a foundation point. So even when you say something like total station, which may be something that you're very used to in your environment, if you would bring us back a little bit, not to grade school, but just to an idea of when you walk onto a scene or when you come on to a project, what information do you look for to see if it's existing? And if not, what information do you then try to create in order to assist you? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
It's progressed from using a tape measure to now I use a robotic laser. It's a robotic surveying laser. You set it up on a tripod and you measure the crime scene, and it'll create a series of points in 3D space.
That's the total station used now by a lot of law enforcement, is that correct?
Law enforcement and construction, road crews use that type of.
In effect, what that does is if I had set up that laser-mounted camera right here, it would bounce hundreds or thousands of points off every area in this courtroom, and then it would have a data configuration of the entire outlying area of the courtroom.
There's two types. That one does point cloud that you're talking about. The type that I have is just point by point. I normally lay out, depending on the size of the scene, 200 to 500 points in a scene. So the laser, I walk around with a pocket computer and a prism, and everywhere I go and hit the computer, it'll give me a point where I am. So the laser follows me around. So it only takes one person to operate. So it'll create kind of a point cloud of the whole scene. So if I did the courtroom here, I put it in the computer in ARIS 360, and it'll give me a 3D view of those points so that I can move around the scene anywhere I want.
How does that compare to total station software?
It's the same. How does what compare to?
Is there any difference between that and total station, or are we talking about a different name for the same software?
Total station gathers the data, and then you export that data to ARIS 360.
So the total station, when we talk about that, that's just actually getting the information, for example, from this courtroom. That would
Yes,
be gathering the information, and then the way you use it is in another software like ARIS 360.
it's a data collector, yes.
And so again, once you get that information, you would go through just generally what you do when you come upon a project to either see if that information is there and utilize it, or to gather your own.
Yes, I look at the data and examine it, make sure it's correct. There's another piece of software besides ARIS 360 that I have. It's called Visual Statement. And between those two, majority of ARIS 360 and the majority of the other software are CHP and law enforcement. So,
CHP being,
California Highway Patrol.
yeah, just we're in FHP, so, okay. And so within the context of the ARIS 360 and gathering, if you will, the environment digitally, how do you then make that relevant to a presentation? How do you put people, things, events, pieces of evidence in context to what you've now gathered?
It creates the scene to scale, and then what you do with that is you combine it with other pieces of equipment. Like I've got a motion capture suit for gathering. It's the most accurate way of gathering a person's movements. It's wireless, it has accelerometers, and you put on the suit, and in real time, you can capture a person's movements. So then I capture a person's movements accurately, and then I can bring those into the scene, and so you have the accurate movements of the person, you have the accuracy of the scene, and you can do it very...
If you would give the court a couple of examples when you talk about the motion capture suits, is that what they're called?
Yes.
Okay. If you would, give the court some examples of how you've utilized that technology in other cases.
You can not only, you can use it a couple different ways. I use it for, well, about a month ago, there was I had to go down to the impound lot in San Jose, and there was a shooting that occurred in a vehicle. The advantage of my suit over other suits is I can take it out to a crime scene. I can get into a vehicle, and it still sees all of the movements. A typical motion capture suit that a lot of people see on TV has little balls all around it. And then there's high-speed cameras that will capture your movements. The problem with that is you can't take it anywhere outside of those cameras. And if you get into a vehicle or behind a wall, those parts of the person disappear because it can't see the balls anymore. So that's why I bought my suit, is I can take it, it has accelerometers that measure your movements. There's 16 of them. So
explain to the court just a little bit more the technology of what that is when you talk about an accelerometer and how that's better than just the visual balls that are seen on a suit.
it's perfect for court because then you can, it gives you a running log of all the movements. Say, for example, somebody hit something and caused a certain amount of damage. With this suit, I could do that same action, and from the accelerometers, you could see how much force it took to cause that amount of damage. So,
To the extent that you can, then advise the court what software exists behind those suits or that interprets the movements of the suits that make that information relevant to your presentation.
it's just software that came with the suit. I don't know the physics behind it, but the engineers that have developed it, they not only use it for motion capture like this, but they also, it's used in biometrics for physical rehabilitation and physical therapy, and it monitors the person's movement from day to day, so then they can see if there's any improvement.
So in effect, I could put on one of those suits if I had a range of motion problem, put on the suit, do some physical therapy, get to here, do more physical therapy, get higher, and the suits actually can measure progress?
Yes, you can see a printout of all the movements of the suit.
And does the software that interprets the movement of the suits also then have criteria that can be put into the software to identify things, as you mentioned, like force or speed of movement and the effect that objects have moving through space?
Yes, if you want to accomplish that in your reconstruction.
So if you can then go back to the example of the car and sort of walk the court through how this suit gives data which is then useful for recreation.
With the truck, I put on the suit. It was still considered a crime scene, so they didn't want it disrupted. So you're able to put on a TVAC suit, which is a protective suit, so you don't contaminate the scene. So I put on the TVAC suit, got into the truck, and what happened in that case was somebody opened the door, tried to pull the person out, and in response to him being the attempt of pulling him out, he reached for a gun and shot him. So,
the person trying to come into the car?
yes.
Okay.
So it was a very good use of the suit. Putting it on, I had an an attorney opened the door, tried to pull me out, and I was able to record it all in real time.
Let's talk about let's continue with that and advise the court, if you would, then what you were able to recreate, what data you used to recreate those movements, firstly, and then we'll talk about possible changes to the movements later. So what were you able to do in that case as far as recreating it, and what data did you use or information did you use to recreate?
In the truck,
Yes, in the car case.
I had accurate measurements of the truck, so I had it recreated the truck. And since I had the motion capture suit on, interacting with the truck, my movements fit well within the truck. So then I take my movements, it exports a BVH file, which is a motion file. And then I bring that into a 3D program that I also have the truck in. And then I can just place that person. What you do is you map that person's movements onto a figure that matches the person that was involved. You map it onto the person's skeleton. So then his movements are all accurate, the size of the person is accurate.
Let me interrupt you and ask you, how do you get the size of the person to be accurate?
From police reports or coroner's reports. Or
So you would use height and weight, and does the software, or a function of the software, is to take that data, input into the software, and it recreates a body in proper proportion to height and weight and whatnot?
It doesn't do any simulation like recreating like that. I just have a figure that I size to the size that I need. And when I bring in the motion capture file, you can specify what height the person is.
And
In
can you
the
specify
software.
their weight, for example?
Weight is more the appearance from photos.
Would it be helpful for you to, and do you have the animation available of the car recreation?
I've got another sample.
Then we'll go on to another one, if you don't have the car one with you. in
This is just
issue.
a simple one that happened in a Sam's Club parking lot.
Okay. And I think it's shutting down, so we might need a moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
Be able to hook this up to you.
Might take a moment. Hardware problem. We have one screen on, but not that one, so I may need some help from the clerk just to do an input change. Unplug it and then put it back in, see if that helps with it self-identifying the source. It's on the screen on here.
Just went off. Just went off the screen.
I think since it's just the court, maybe if we could somehow approach the bench, you could see it off of his computer screen. I think that would probably satisfy the need for me to show a video unrelated to this.
Fine, you may bring it up here. Council want to approach?
Just identify where we are. If you would advise the court, you can hear us? Ma'am, you can hear us? Thanks. Advise the court what it is that you're about to show.
This is a sample of a motion file applied to a figure in the computer and dropped into the scene.
And very quickly, how is this scene recreated so that it actually shows the environment that is the background for the event?
This was all created in 3D software.
And where the information come from?
There was a security camera. It was very bad resolution, so I went out and measured the scene and placed the vehicles where they were in the video. And this is just a better representation of what they couldn't see in the security video.
And in order to come up with those graphics, when you say you went out and measured the scene, then is that the information that you then put into one of the graphics programs you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
And then we're about to see the actual animation. So how does the information concerning the movement of the animation get placed into the environment?
I just imported from the motion capture software.
Okay. And again, that's just something that you take from the one environment that you created, and then when you put the action into it, how does it get placed in the right location, and how does that occur?
I can move the figures around according to where they were placed in the scene. I can move around, rotate them, and place them into the scene.
Okay, so that's a manipulation that you can do based upon either advice of counsel, evidence in a courtroom, or even come up with alternatives as to how an event may occur, correct?
Yes, it doesn't change their movement. I can just change their location in the scene.
Okay. Go ahead and play that for the court then, if you would.
Oops. So I actually used a shopping cart to position my hands correctly.
So is that then a graphic representation of information that you took from evidence, or witness statements, whatever, and then made a graphic representation of it on the screen?
Yes.
And when you say that the movement of the person, how do you decide how the movement is, both the speed, the direction, how does all that occur?
It was timed from the security camera.
Okay. As far as that, nothing further than
Okay. Thank you.
Now that we've had a chance to look at that animation, was there anything, before we get specifically to the Zimmerman case, I'd like to ask this, was there anything different in the software or the hardware that you used in that representation than the one that you've used in the Zimmerman case?
The Zimmerman case, there was more total station data. It wasn't data that I acquired, it was data that was provided from the DA's office.
Okay, before we get to your specific work on this case, tell me, are there any coursework or training programs that you go through to either enhance your abilities to do this type of work or to maintain your level of competence?
both in the ARIS 360 software. I've gone through classes in that and been trained in that. I've been through 3. It's only required to go through 1, but I've gone through 3 total station data classes and been certified in using those in both ARIS 360 software and visual statement software.
Let's talk about the total station for a moment. That's the software program you said that law enforcement use?
The total station is the piece of equipment. It's a Sokia robotic total station.
And actually, you know, in the Zimmerman case, that there was total station information available having been gathered by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, correct?
Correct.
In addition to those certifications that you mentioned, well, these total station certifications, who actually does the training for that?
The software companies train us.
Who own or license out the software?
Yes.
And what was the most recent time that you've taken any training regarding total station?
Training in those courses for certification, I think it's been a couple of years. It's on my CV. I can't remember the exact date, but also in the ARIS 360 software, I continually update my skills in that. They have a webinar every Friday that I watch.
So on total station, have there been any significant changes in the software since your certification, or is it still basically the same program?
The same. They come up with the software comes up with upgrades every 6 months or so.
And how about the ARIS 360 program? Do you take training courses on that? And you mentioned the webinars every Friday.
Yeah, I've gone through training and certification on using that software. Not only using the software, but using it with Total Station.
And how long have you used the ARIS 360 software?
When it first came out, I believe it's 2 years ago in September, I think is when it first came out.
Do you have the current version of that software?
Yes,
And up to date on your training with the current version?
yes.
Any other software programs that you utilize in your general work in creating computer graphics and animations?
The 3D software that I use is it's Luxology, use Modo.
I'm sorry, say that again, it's slower for the court reporters.
The company is called Luxology, and the software is Modo.
M-O-D-O,
Yes,
and it's Lexology.
Luxology, L-U-X.
And explain to the court then what that 3D software is and how it differs from the other two we've mentioned so far.
It's for creating 3D scenes. They use it for animation movies, animated movies.
Does that then give you or allow you to present the environment we talked about, or the framework within which the animation is going to be created?
Yes, it's an environment where you can take all the data and bring it into it and create the scene.
So if you were to create an animation of this area, would you then do the dimensions, get the environment, and then start putting in elements like the desks and the credenzas and the clerk's desk, things like that?
Yes.
And how do you get those accurate?
The measurements from the total station data.
So that the total station would be used in conjunction. It would bounce points off the various relevant points here, and then sort of input it into the software, into the program.
Yes. And then also, one part of the ARIS 360 software is I have a helicopter. I haven't used it in this case. It's just a drone. And I fly it above the scene. I can take a photograph of the scene. And then with that photo, I have the data points from the total station of the scene. I take the photo and it'll lay it on, it'll drape it right onto those points. So you get a very accurate outdoor reconstruction of a scene.
So in effect, you can get more of a bird's eye view of the situation and also make certain that the ground level scene is accurate based upon a comparison with those data points?
Yes.
have you had an opportunity then to create these type of animations and discuss them in the context of civil and/or criminal cases?
Yes.
And if you would give the court an idea over what period of time you've done that, and then we'll talk more specifically about the type cases and whether or not you've testified in court.
It's been an ongoing for the last 13 years of doing it for criminal and civil cases.
What was the first time that you created and presented an animation in a court case? Not necessarily in a courtroom yet, but into a court case.
2009.
If you would then tell the court, have you ever then gotten to the point where your animations have been utilized in a courtroom?
Yes.
And tell the court the experience that you've had in both civil and criminal settings regarding your testimony and admissibility of the animations.
Well, also I use a motion capture suit not only for doing animations, but also to verify a person's position. I did one a couple months ago where a person was also in a vehicle. Somebody came up, shot through the window, and then shot a couple more times. And I had to determine which shots were done with him in the car and which shots were done because the car door was open and then he fell down. So I had to verify his position when those 3 shots were fired.
So in that animation, it explained to the court how is there a name for this motion suit,
It's a XSEN.
XSEN?
Yes, XSEN's initial motion capture suit.
And you used that in the shooting case. Explain to the court how it benefited you and in the presentation of the animation.
What I did was I put on the suit, got into a vehicle that matched the vehicle that was used, and recorded my movements of getting out of the vehicle. And then I put it in the computer, and then in the figure that matched the victim, I put in the rod to match the bullet trajectory, and then looked at his positions getting out of the car to see what positions the bullet trajectory would be, and if it was consistent with the height and the position of the shooter.
Now let's talk about that in a little bit more context. So when you get in the car, you have the motion suit on, and it's communicating with a computer, correct?
Correct. And
The computer knows exactly where the body is, in that it knows exactly where all 16 accelerometers are, correct?
yes, you calibrate it at the beginning of your recording.
Calibrate for accuracy.
Yes.
And so at that point, you're doing movement, but the computer is actually gathering data on 16 discrete points in space that are moving throughout space. Is that
Yes.
correct? The computer at that point may not know it's a body. It just is keeping track of 16 data points. Would that be accurate?
Well, in real time on the laptop, you can see a mannequin. So if I move my arms up, the mannequin will follow all of my movements.
Explain to the court how you handle the frailty of an animation, because it is not an exact video of, in this case, the driver moving his arms one particular way, but rather you deciding how the arms ought to be moved and how the body moves. So how do you address that frailty of the animation?
You look at certain things that you know from the discovery, like the bullet trajectory, the opening of the door, and also the physical characteristics of the inside of the truck. And you look at different scenarios to find which one best matches the scene and the evidence and discovery that you have.
So in effect, what you do is do an animation that, at the point you create it, is consistent with the known information about the do you then make your animation in consideration of the evidence known to you at the time?
Yes.
And if that information is modified or augmented by additional information, do you then modify your animation to come into conformity with that?
Yes, whatever's most accurate.
At the point in time then when you don the suit, like you mentioned a moment ago, that the software allows you to change the configuration of the body for things like height.
Yes.
And then how do you then do a analysis of the person's physical size, not just height, but if the person is particularly thin, particularly obese, how do you look at that and what do you input into the program to accomplish that?
Most of that is done through photographs that you have from coroner's reports or police reports, photographs.
So do you then take measurements of those photographs, for example, do the ratio comparisons and then put that ratio comparison onto the mannequin, as you say, to make it as close as possible to the live event?
Yes, the measurements that you can get from a coroner's report or a police report, or even any measurements that you can take.
And you also look at photographs?
Yes. There's a thing you can do, which is, I do not only on that, but say for example, police took pictures of a scene. One of the things that's challenging with what I do is I come in after the fact. So I have to rely on police photographs that were taken at the scene. So a lot of times you don't have certain measurements for things, but you may have one measurement for an item in a photograph. So if you have one measurement of an item in a photograph with photogrammetry, you can extrapolate the measurements of other items, and that's photograph.
Just explain very quickly what you just said by photogrammetry. What is that, and how does that assist you in coming up with measurements?
It's, if you have one known object that you know the measurement of, with software, you can extrapolate the measurements of other items in the scene.
For example, if I'm standing here and you know how tall this is, and you might know how tall this camera is, that would assist you in telling you how tall I am?
Yes, and other items, like I can tell how far away from the wall that you are by the position of your feet relative to the height of the wall.
And that's what gives you the photogrammetric distance perspective, right? So that if I was this much further away, you were looking at it, it might be different than if I was this close.
Yes. You lay down a plane in the software, you lay down a plane, and if you know one measurement, you apply that measurement to the grid, to the plane, and it'll extrapolate the measurements of the other items.
And that's all the computer software that exists in these various programs we talked about. You don't necessarily know the algorithms or the math and physics behind it. You just know that it has been certified to work.
Yes.
And this type software, and we're talking about this concept of a motion suit, does that have application also in the entertainment industry?
Yes.
What type?
The suit that I have, it was used in Avatar, Iron Man, X-Men, and they use it for creating movements of the characters in the movies. And it also is used in gaming, like Madsen football. So they put on the suit and record the movements and apply them to the figures.
So in effect, when we see Robert Downey Jr. running around looking like Iron Man, it's actually a stuntman in a motion suit?
Or he could be wearing it.
Okay. And then the Iron Man is then placed on top of him in the movie?
In the computer, in the 3D program.
Okay. And we were talking, and I took you off on a bit of a path, we were talking about your experience in testifying. So you advised the court, I think you said about 2007 you testified about a case. How many times have you testified in court? where your animations were presented. And do you need your CV?
Yeah.
Just a moment. On that for a moment, we'll come back to your CV. It seems to be close by, but not right here. So if you could advise the court your experience in testifying regarding the animations.
Animations or use of
I'm
the
sorry.
suit?
Use of the suit and your presentations in court.
Pretty much most of the work that I've done since I acquired the suit in 2008.
I'm sorry?
Pretty much most of the cases that I've worked on since 2008. So probably 20.
Okay. And if you could advise the court the types of cases that you've worked on and what courts you presented them to.
That's also on my CV.
Yeah.
It's got a list of the counties and the,
Sure. Just having a bit of a trouble finding it right now. I don't know if you have a copy of it on your
I think I got it on my iPad.
computer. Sorry.
I might have it on my iPad.
If you don't mind, if the court doesn't mind a moment for you to get that, and we'll present a copy, a very hard copy as soon as we can.
Mr. Manti, would you like to see it when he brings it up?
I actually have a copy, so I don't need to see one, but
It was provided, I just, not suggesting anything, but when it wasn't a hearing, then it didn't know that I needed that information.
I don't have it on here.
I think
need
Mr.
it.
Manti would be so nice just to let us use what seems to be the only copy in the courtroom,
that's the front area highlighted, but I don't mind.
if you don't mind. Thanks very much. If that assists you, then tell us the type cases in the courtrooms that you have presented that work in.
I've worked on 59 criminal trials so far, 21 civil trials, and I've done declaration or testified in 20 of those.
Okay. So approximately 100 presentations, whether by declaration or testimony?
Oh, 59 was the total,
Oh,
or
I'm
59 plus 21 civil.
Okay. And you give the court then an overview of the type of criminal cases you've been involved in?
Trying to figure out shooting incidents. I've worked with the Department of Justice in police officer involved shootings, stabbings. It varies quite a bit.
Okay. In each of those 59 cases then, did you take on the information that we've talked about, gather together data, and then make a graphic presentation, whether it's an animation or poster type presentations?
Yes.
And are we now talking about the spectrum of murder cases and aggravated batteries? I mean, do you know the charges, or were you just told the information?
Sometimes I've been told more detail. Sometimes I'm just given the evidence and I do creation from the evidence.
Within that context, let's focus on the 59 cases. How much or what percentage of that would you have worked on behalf of the defense, and what percentage on behalf of the prosecution?
100% on the defense, but that doesn't, some of that has also to do with defense of police officers in police officer involved shootings.
And if you would explain to the court what you mean by that and what cases you handled in that regard.
If the Department of Justice has a police officer that is, a civil case is brought against him, or a shooting occurred. Then I've done work with them on doing reconstructions on that, also assisting them in court in the presentation of their material.
Okay. Again, focusing for a moment on the criminal cases, have you actually presented testimony in court in any of those 59 cases?
Yes, in about 8, presented personally or had my material
Has your
presented?
materials presented after been qualified?
Yes, pretty much all 59.
Okay, maybe just give some flavor to the court as to what courts you presented to, and then we'll talk about whether or not actual testimony was required.
I've been qualified as an expert in Placer County, Alameda County. I've got Placer County,
Can you spell that?
Placer. I got about 16 counties here that,
And those are all in California, correct?
yes.
Okay. If you would, just for the record purposes, advise, when you're talking about the counties, are these counties in which the courts of that county have authorized you to testify as an expert? Where you've actually presented or had your information presented to a court where it was qualified to be good information to be presented?
All the courts where my information has been presented, it's all been qualified. It's never been denied.
If you would, list through the counties in California then, and do it slow enough so the court reporter can get it down, and there may be some need for spelling. Just want to make sure it's a record.
Okay, Placer County, Alameda County, Contra Costa County, San Bernardino County, Sacramento County, Los Angeles County, Napa County, Fresno County, Solano County, Solano, Yolo County, San Francisco County, Riverside County, Stanislaus County, Stanislaus, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Orange County, Santa Cruz, and El Dorado.
Have you ever testified in Florida before?
No,
Have you testified outside of California before?
no,
How long have you actually had the motion suits that you talked about a moment ago?
since 2008.
And in those counties that you testified, those counties, did you testify in each one of those counties, or was your information you created presented in those counties?
Information that it was both.
Okay.
My information was through either being as an expert witness testifying in court or a declaration, because sometimes the material that I create can be testified to by another expert, like a ballistic expert or a medical expert or.
Do I take it that in certain cases you might create the animation or the graphic, and then that is admitted by what you call declaration, we may call affidavit, such that the underlying graphic is brought to court even without you having to come in live and testify?
Yes, I just speak to the accuracy of the creation.
Have you actually testified in court concerning the accuracy and the methods used to create the animations or the graphics?
Yes.
And if you would advise the court, as best you can, what counties first? And I'm going to ask you, to the best of your recall, what cases and types of cases you've testified to in court. You want to go through them one at a time, or however you want to best present that?
I don't have a listing of exactly which counties
Just from your memory, what cases have you testified to in court? What type of cases?
All the ones that I've testified to in court have been criminal
Okay.
trials.
So give the court then an example of some of the cases that you testified to and what animation you presented and what you testified to regarding it.
There was one in Placer County, it was about 4 months ago. I testified in that on doing a shooting reconstruction, and that was to determine the position of the person shot and the position of the person shooting, and then what order of the shots that occurred and what position they were in when they were hit.
And was that one of the examples you gave us a moment ago?
No, this is another example.
And did you testify in that court?
Yes.
Were you qualified as an expert in this area of the presentation, the creation of and presentation of graphics and animation?
Yes, I was qualified as an expert, and the motion capture suit was also accepted.
Okay. Another case where you testified in this regard?
There was one in Contra Costa County, the one where I was trying to determine the position of the person of the 3 shots when he was shot in the car. I was able to determine that there was only 1 shot through the window, and then the other 2 shots were outside of the vehicle.
And was your testimony, were you qualified as an expert to give that testimony in that court?
Yes, I was.
One more, if you would, about another case where you testified in court and the basis for it.
There was a couple down in Moreno Valley, down in Southern California. There was 2 of them, actually. One of them was a person was inside a house. They were threatening suicide. They were chatting to somebody saying they were going to kill themselves. Police officers responded, and they were waiting at the corner of a garage, asking him to come out. One of the officers was looking out at the street because people were starting to come around. The other officer was looking into the doorway. So what I needed to do in that case was determine who shot what, which officer did the shooting, and also the position of the person that was in the house. In my reconstruction, the person in the house said that he was on the floor in the kitchen the entire time. He was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder on a police officer. I was able to show that he was in the house the entire time because of the angle of the door when the bullets hit. The first police officer said that the person came out and pointed a gun at him. So he started firing. He fired 3 shots. His partner turned around and just started firing, shot the partner in the elbow, and continued firing into the doorway. I was able to show which shots came first, the 3 shots, and what position the door was in. And then the second series of shots, what position the door was in at that time, and able to show that there was no way somebody could have come through the door when those shots went off because there was such tight space outside the door. If he was outside the door, he would have been hit. He wasn't hit, and there was no way for him to go in and out of the door, so he had to be in the...
Was that testimony then accepted in that court?
Yes.
And did you actually give evidence or testimony before the court or the jury in that case?
Yes.
Of the 59 cases that you were involved in on the criminal side, we'll talk about civil in a moment, but of those 59 cases, have there been other cases where you've been attempted to be qualified as an expert for the underlying graphics or animation where you were failed to be qualified as an expert?
No.
In all 59 then, either by affidavit or declaration or testimony, you were able to give your testimony in regard to what you created?
Declaration or testified was 20 cases.
Okay.
So in all of those cases, I've never been disqualified. I've been qualified in all of them.
Was the experience you had on the civil side similar, the other cases that you've talked about?
Those were mostly information designed for the attorneys for presenting their case to the jury.
Were there any of those cases on the civil side where it actually went all the way to trial testimony, where you gave testimony before a court or a jury?
Not in the civil trials.
Just on those in the criminal that we've already talked about?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a moment then about the Zimmerman case, and advise the court then what you did and how you first became involved in this case.
First became involved at towards the end of April. I initially had a conversation in August, but my first meeting with the attorneys was towards the end of April.
We had talked in August of 2012, correct?
Yes.
And then you went through a medical condition that sort of took you out of sorts for several months?
Yes.
Okay. That's all resolved?
We'll see.
Okay. And now you're back to work, and we talked again, was it April of this year?
Yes.
Okay. And what information did you then gather and review? Well, first, what task were you given as far as work on behalf of this case?
The scope of work
Yes.
was to do a reconstruction of the scene with the information that we had and creation of an animated timeline.
Okay. And what information, was that something within your qualifications?
Yes.
Is that similar to what you have done in these other cases that we've talked about, both the 50 non-criminal cases and the 20 or so that either live testimony or declaration testimony was given?
Yes. There's not a lot of opportunity, though, to have live audio during the occurrence.
So
So
this is-
that was different in this case, where we're able to have work audio into it with the 911 call.
Somewhat unique because we had actual audio recreation or audio evidence, real-time evidence available for you to use in your recreation?
Yes, it helps you with the timeline.
Okay. Similar, I guess, to when there's a security video camera that exists and you have some of that information, that makes it that much more accurate?
Yes.
Video surveillance did not exist in this case, though?
No.
So this was within the area of your expertise where you've been qualified before to create this type of graphic and animation?
Yes.
So what information did you then gather or was given to you to assist you in the work that you've done?
The discovery from the district attorney's office, photographs, coroner reports, police reports, audio from the 911 calls. There was also investigation or questioning at the police department of witnesses.
Depositions?
Depositions, yes. Also photographs that they took of the scene, and then also total station data that they, from their measurements.
Were you able, was there any information that you needed in order to create the animation or the graphics that you did not have available to you?
Use of the motion capture suit at the scene, that wasn't available to me. So I made 2 visits to the scene.
Okay. So in effect, you came back, once you had the information and the foundation for the animation or the recreation, you then came here to utilize the motion capture suits?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when that was done approximately?
Second week in May.
And explain to the court then what you do with that and who did it and how you assure accuracy in that regard?
To assure accuracy, that's where it's good that I can interact with the suits at the scene, because if there's a slope or other physical characteristics of the scene, you catch that in the movements of the person that's walking over the surface.
In this case, was there any concern that you had with the data that was given to you that was gleaned from law enforcement? It looked good, except for there were 7 points that were obviously, they were labeled windows, and they were obviously not in the position of the windows. They're actually sort of in trees where the total station laser bounced off something different than what the person thought it was?
Yes, where they set up the total station at the T intersection of the sidewalk. They pointed it up at second-story window on the right side, and it went through the tree, and going through the tree, it picked up a few branches. So there's 5 points or 6 points on the one side, and I believe 1 point on the left side that went through a tree. So you've got points in the computer that are just hanging in space. So it's easy to see that it's at the location of the tree and not to use it.
Were you able to address that or fix it in your software that you ended up using?
I didn't manipulate the data at all. I just used the other points that they had.
So in effect, just excise those out because they were obviously sort of in the way or errors?
Yes.
Did you, in addition to the motion capture suits, we'll talk about that in just a second, did you do any other measuring of the scene now that you're on scene?
I also had another piece of equipment. It's called a Matterport,
Will you spell that, please?
M-A-T-T-E-R-P-O-R-T. It's a Matterport scanner. It also sets up on a tripod, and it has a little computer in it and some cameras. So it has one camera that takes photographs, and another camera will take infrared photos for distance purposes. So you set this up, and with the iPad interface, you can just hit scan, and it'll twirl around in 360, and it'll scan the area around the scanner, and you just walk it through the scene. So it captures all the little intricate parts of the scene, along with texture map of the photos.
Oh, what map, I'm sorry?
Texture map of the photos.
And how does that assist you in what you created in this case?
It was very helpful in getting the slope and the positioning of the buildings and the trees and the sidewalk.
Did that then make it even a more accurate rendition of the scene than your total station was able to give you?
Yes, it added to the total station data. And I verified the Matterport scanner with the total station data so that it all matched up.
It meshed pretty well so that what you came up with in your review matched the total station data?
Yes.
Did the Matterport then allow for a better graphic representation of the sloping that existed on the actual ground?
Yes.
And total station had not done that?
They didn't take very many, they didn't measure very many points. They mainly measured there's a couple metal drains and a sprinkler head or piece. They went around and measured those and the edge of the sidewalk and then the building, but they didn't do, in the location of the trees, but they didn't do really any measuring of the slope.
So did the Matterport then allow for a even more accurate rendition of the sloping of the ground in the area where the T intersection was, the area where Trayvon Martin's body was, and other points along the way?
Yes.
Mr. O'Mara, Mr. Shoemaker has been standing almost
Yeah,
an hour. I thought that when you wanted him to stand at the podium,
Yeah.
that it was going to be a short presentation. Would you like to take a seat, sir?
How much longer? I'll be okay.
We're getting to the meat of it right now, and that's not going to, I have to have him review the animation for you and the pictures, so I'm gonna have to drag it back down here in a moment, so I'm gonna move it along.
Thank you.
So, you went to the scene, got everything that you needed to start working on what your project was, correct?
Correct.
So then what did you do with that information? Well, we were talking now again about the motion capture suits, who did them, and what frailties exist with having other people use the motion capture suits.
There was a couple volunteers from the your law office that put the suits on. Then as far as the timing for the second part of the scenario where they were on the ground, we used, or I used the audio from the 911 call for the timing of it, to time it with the shot of the gun.
Okay. Did you also available for you, or to you, John Good's police statements and I guess at that point deposition testimony regarding what he said he saw and what happened?
Yes, that was used for the their positioning.
Did you also have information available to you from a Miss Mora, M-O-R-A, a woman who said she saw George Zimmerman on top of Trayvon Martin some seconds after the shot?
Yes,
And did that assist you in the creation of your animation, putting the bodies where other witnesses saw them?
yes,
Did you also then have, as you mentioned, what we now call the Lauer 911 audio, which has in it the shot and a matter of time before the shot itself?
yes,
What did you also have? Whatever other information was available to you from the discovery?
there's also Ms. Lauer's police report statement.
And that included her statement that she first heard the altercation occur at the T intersection?
Yes,
You also had Jeremy Weinberg's information available to you when he cooperated that?
yes, from the same location.
Now, as we fast forward through this, you had created some poster graphics, we'll call them stills of the scene, and we'll get to those in just a minute, based upon that testimony as well.
Yes,
Did you most recently remove Mr. Weinberg's statement from one of those posters, since I advised you that he ended up not testifying in your trial?
yes,
So along the way, and we'll get to it in just a minute, were you modifying the animation and the posters to come in line with actual trial testimony,
yes,
at least as it was disclosed to you by me or on my behalf?
yes, to get the most up-to-date, accurate representation of it.
Okay. And were you in fact able to create an animation based upon the information available to you?
Yes,
Before we view that, let's just go over the sources of that information. You had testified a moment ago that you had seen discovery, correct?
correct,
That's what we call it here, and that's including witness statements, depositions, and other information like autopsies and police reports, correct?
correct,
And did you also have available to you diagrams made by the witnesses, such as John Good did a diagram showing stick figures with certain placement of bodies,
yes,
and all the other information within the discovery?
correct.
I know that you don't know the full answer to this question, but did you get a lot of information from the defense, including all the witness statements, police reports, and diagrams that you felt were necessary to create your animation?
Yes, I did.
Did you even receive a lot of information that was extraneous or unnecessary in creating your animation, but that you wanted to review it to see if it was relevant?
Yes,
You also then have conversations with me or people on my behalf regarding the creation of the animation.
correct.
What other sources of information did you have in order to come up with the animation and the posters that you did?
Pretty much everything that you mentioned.
Anything else besides that? The discovery itself and conversations with me?
My going to the scene and scanning the scene, photographing the scene, doing the motion capture.
Was there anything that you would like to have had to assist you in creating the posters and the animation that was not available to you in this case?
I believe I had everything I needed to create the scene.
I mean, aside from a video of the whole event or something that would, okay. Then I'm going to ask you to present the animation you created. We'll talk about it, but we try one more time for a moment to see if we can get this projected to cooperate, because it's going to look a lot better there.
It was working yesterday.
Yeah. Showing up on the display screen.
T, do we need to get Victor in here?
We'll need it sometime during the day, so we'll just get it fixed now and have it for later. Well, good, we're gonna need it soon.
Well, they can fix it during lunch. I still have a jury sitting back there now for an
Okay,
hour.
then let's try it.
I had not anticipated that we were going to take this time, so if you'll please bring it up to the bench and I'll look at it from there. I can.
Do you need police or medical? Maybe both, I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside. Okay, what's the address that they're near? Lane? Is this in the Twin Lake Homes in Sanford? Yeah. Okay, and is it a male or female? It sounds like a male. And you don't know why? I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know. It's when someone's like, say stop. Okay. Does he look hurt to you? I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending. So you think he's yelling help? Yes. All right. What is your? There's gunshots. You just heard gunshots? Yes. How many? There's one. Jimmy, get down. No, come here. Is he no longer yelling?
Tape continues, but the animation doesn't.
I don't know.
So I don't think you need to hear that.
Jimmy, get in here now.
Now, as you're at the bench, there are the posters, which is another things that he created.
These the new ones?
Some of them are new. We took out Weinberg, for example.
Still didn't get this.
These are very nice. I don't know if you want testimony at the bench, just so he can at least
If
identify
he's
what
going
they
to
are.
show them to me, yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's go through this, and I may question you about the animation in a minute, but if you would, just advise the court what this is, first of all, and how it was created.
This was created from a still image from the 3D model that I created for the animation. It's to explain the location of the markers and the witnesses.
And just so I'm clear, where'd you get the markings, where you have the markers, how did you identify them and put them at that particular location?
It's straight from the total station data.
Okay.
I not only used total station data, but they also had a flat 2D illustration of the scene from their data.
And that was incorporated as well?
Yes, so the location of these markers are exactly where they're marked on that.
Okay, next slide.
It's
Same thing,
basically the
diff-
same thing, just
Same thing, different view.
different view.
Next slide.
This one's to show the slope.
And again, that came more from the Matterport than the total station?
It's from the Matterport, but it's verified with the total station. The different areas where the concrete, the sprinkler and the drain heads, they matched up with the Matterport. So I was able to verify the slope.
But this does give you a better slope than the total station alone would give you? A better rendition of the slope?
Correct. They don't, on their total station, they just had sidewalk marked and those
Right. They did not run like
drains marked.
they did not run like a bunch of points on the ground, which would have given you the slope, and that's what you did with Matterport?
Yes.
Okay, next one.
Then this is just to show photographs from discovery of what was at those markers.
The flashlights and where they were found.
Yes.
Okay, next one. Again, different parts of different items, where they were located, and for example, top left-hand corner is the picture that you just imported from the picture we gave you.
Yes.
Bottom left is the picture from the medical examiner with the Mr. Martin's wet pants.
Yes, from the scene.
Okay, then the cartridge case at the bottom,
Yes.
and then the cell phone.
Yes.
Okay. And in the middle?
This?
Yes.
That's from the point of view of Mr. Good.
Oh, and you can see right behind the pictures on the left is Mr. Good's head in
You can
effect.
see his ear right back there.
And that
And
was-
it's taken with a 50 mm lens in the software. So that is what most closely resembles what a person will see.
Okay, and there's a line going sort of right above the cartridge case. Is that a distance measurement from what to what?
The edge of the porch concrete to the marker number 8.
Number 8. And when you say 50 millimeter, that's the way the human eye looks at an event, it's about 49 or 50 millimeters?
Exact measurement, I believe, is 49.5, but it's just rounded off to 50.
So you look at, this is a perspective that one would see as a human's looking at it through a human's eyes.
Yes, if you were standing there, that's how they would appear if you were
That's the
standing.
perspective.
Perspective, yes.
Okay, next one.
This is going back to the T intersection.
And this was the one where we initially had Mr. Weinberg on it as well. He didn't testify, so we just have Ms. Lauer. I think that's a trial testimony as to where she thought the altercation occurred.
Yes. So it's an explanation of why I placed him there. So it's a,
Okay.
And that is John Good's head off there to the left as sort of a focus point.
yes,
And that again is a 50 millimeter presentation
yes,
with the distance included.
yes,
And that states what John Good testified to at trial regarding the, what he saw and the people's descriptions.
yes, yes.
Next one. And that's Ms. Mora's testimony from trial as to what she saw when she looked out around her column.
Yes,
Is that the column on the right-hand side?
yes, there's a aerial map here showing where her condo is.
And is that also a perspective of what she would see from her location?
Yes, it's a 50 millimeter lens. Also in all these photographs, I didn't try to reconstruct the lighting because it's more important to see detail.
Okay, obviously, if I was Ms. Moore looking at this, the lighting was much darker back then, correct?
Correct.
So that's one frailty, if you will, of the presentation of the posting, is because if the lighting was what it was at night, almost nothing could be seen. As far as your poster presentation?
The jury would have a hard time seeing detail.
Is that the last one?
Yes.
Yeah. Bring out the yellow so you can remember. Want to have a moment, John?
I think the problem they're having is with the Apple computer interaction, and they're gonna check it out over lunch.
We'll change it out to a Mac, to a PC, and get this presentation on a PC should whatever part of
Okay.
it be
Do you have
allowed.
any other questions?
Just very briefly, which is, so you have been doing this type of graphic and animation work and presenting to court for the past 13 years or so?
Yes.
And I think you testified that your work has not ever been disqualified or disallowed in a court?
Correct.
Tell me your awareness of the industry of animation and other people who do this type of work.
The type of work that I do, I'm the only one in the United States with a wireless motion capture suit, so I'm unique in that way.
There are other people who use similar motion capture suits, those being the older style, the one with the balls, correct?
I believe some reconstruction are using it, but it's really very rare that you find a reconstruction that has a motion capture suit, whether it's the balls or the wireless.
The area of reconstruction of events, though, you've been involved in that for how long?
13 years.
And this type of work is also accepted, is it not, in the entertainment community, as we've talked about?
Yes.
And that's used, as we talked about, in both video games and in motion pictures, such as Avatar and Iron Man.
Yes.
And this software that you utilize, tell the court where that fits into the industry of reconstruction of events.
The 3D software I use or the AIRS 360?
Either as a compendium or individually.
It's just one of the key elements that I use in reconstructing.
And how long has that software been around?
Luxology has been around probably 4 years, but I believe 4. It started out as version 201. They're up to 701 now, so it's been around for a while.
Okay. And do you ever attend seminars or any type of conventions where other reconstructionists interact or talk about information in regard to this industry?
Yes. Well, the software actually has a users group that gets together, the Moto software, and I've given presentations there on the work that I do.
How often do you give presentations to that group?
I've just presented to them to once.
And in that user group, is that made up of the people who use this software on an ongoing basis?
Yes.
We're talking about the ARIS 360 now?
No, that is the Modo software.
I'm sorry.
There's a group, the ARIS 360 gets together with a webinar every Friday.
Okay. And do you keep up on that part of the industry, the interaction between other people who use this software?
Yes.
And is this software one of the softwares that is accepted in the community of people who create animations or recreate scenes, whether it be for accident reconstruction or other types of recreations?
Yes. The Highway Patrol uses, I think there's 3 basic kinds of software that is used for car accident and accident or crime scene reconstruction for the police departments, which is Visual Statement, ARIS 360, and there's another software which is called Crime Time or something like that. That's what Sanford Police uses on theirs.
Is the software then you use some of the most up-to-date and current software that's available for this type of work?
Yes, ARIS 360 and Visual Statement are the industry standard for accident and crime scene reconstruction.
And do your contemporaries who do work similar to yours, though they may not have the suits that you have, use this type of software to do their work?
Some of them, it's mostly used in police departments for their reconstruction.
The ARIS 360 or the Moto or?
Probably 80% of ARIS 360's customers, I've asked them, they said 80% are police departments. The rest are accident reconstructionists like myself, or crime scene reconstructionists, or private investigators.
And you interact with these people, including law enforcement, on these user group meetings that you have?
Yes, you can ask questions, and if you have anything coming up from the week, you can get it answered at the end of the week.
Within the context then of accident reconstructionists and animators, is this software then the type of software which is used in that industry?
Yes, mine's kind of like cutting edge.
Yours is more advanced, correct?
Yes.
And even you say that you're the only one who uses the new style of motion suits for your type of work, correct?
Correct.
They are used, however, again, in the entertainment industry much more so, correct?
Correct. They're also used in, like I mentioned, medical rehabilitation.
Is any limitation to their availability based upon their expense?
Yes.
Okay, they're still quite expensive?
Yes.
No further questions, John?
Move across.
Just, I could ask for a 5-minute break before we do that, and I would also ask the witness to just assume the stand.
We can have a 5-minute recess. Court will be in recess for 5 minutes. And when we come back, Mr. Shoemaker, if you please take the stand. Please be seated. Is Mr. Shoemaker here? or- How much longer do you think that this is all going to take? Because I've had a jury sitting back there since 9 o'clock. I stayed late last night so I could get this accomplished and was told I didn't have to. So how much longer do you think it's going to take?
I'm going to ballpark it at 45 minutes.
45 minutes? No. We'll do this afterwards. I'm not having a jury sit back here for another 45 minutes doing nothing. So we'll have to do this in the afternoon. Mr. Shoemaker, you can remain outside. We'll continue the hearing after court. Are we ready with your next witness? Because I want to bring the jury in. Is the defense ready with your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, are we ready to bring the jury in?
A moment, Your Honor. This may help.
Very brief.
Very brief. Put it a little minute.
Yes, you may. Mr. Zimmerman, please stand up for just one moment, sir.
Yes, sir.
I have been informed by counsel that the testimony of Dr. Di Maio is going to be carved down. And I don't want to know what the discussions were. I just want to know, did you have discussions with Mr. O'Mara about Dr. Di Maio's testimony?
Yes, sir.
And based upon those discussions, do you agree with his representation that he is not going to ask certain area topics from Dr. Di Maio?
Yes, sir.
And that is your decision that you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Has anybody promised you anything to get you to make that decision?
No, Your Honor.
Has anybody threatened you?
No, Your Honor.
Are you doing so freely and voluntarily?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Are we ready to bring the jury in?
Yes, Your Honor. No, not quite. It's very close.
Well, how close are we?
Would like to have the physical exhibits in the courtroom, Your Honor. The shirts that have been encased.
Okay, if you'll please open the clerk, please open the evidence locker door and please get out whatever you think you're going to need. Can somebody from the defense please go in there and see what you need? Are we now ready to bring the jury in?
Yes, we are.
State?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Let's bring the jury in. Lisa?
Jury's present, Your Honor.
Please be seated. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I apologize for keeping you sitting back there, but we have been busy working here in the courtroom. During the overnight, I'm going to ask you my questions. If your answer is yes to any of the questions, please raise your hand. During the overnight recess, did any of you have any discussions amongst yourselves or with anybody else about the case? No hands are being raised. Did any of you read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case? No hands are being raised. Did any of you use any type of an electronic device to go on the internet to do independent research about the case, people, places, things, or terminology? No hands are being raised. And finally, did any of you read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, blogs, or social networking pages about the case? No hands are being raised. Thank you very much. Mr. West, call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Vincent Di Maio.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Morning. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
If you would, please state your name.
My name is Dr. Vincent J.M. Di Maio.
And would you spell your last name, please?
Capital D, small I, a space, capital M, A-I-O.
Thank you, Dr. Di Maio. And what is your profession, please?
I'm a physician, presently employed in the private practice of forensic pathology.
Do you hold a degree in medicine?
Yes, sir. I obtained my M degree from the State University of New York Downstate Medical Center back in 1965.
And Dr. Di Maio, would you please outline for the jury and the court your educational background then beginning at medical school?
Okay. As I said, I graduated medical school in 1965. I then did a one-year internship in pathology at Duke Hospital in Durham, North Carolina. From there, I did a 3-year residency in anatomical and clinical pathology at the State University Downstate Medical Center Hospital. Following that, I did a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the state of Maryland. After successfully completing the 3 residency programs, I took my specialty board exams and was certified as a specialist in the fields of anatomical pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
Is that board certification? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, a board certification means that you've successfully completed a number of years of training in a subspecialty of medicine, and then you have taken a written and practical exam and passed the exam. And then you are certified and you're recognized by other physicians as a specialist in these areas of medicine.
Dr. Di Maio, you mentioned anatomical, clinical, forensic pathology. Let's start first with what is pathology, and then maybe some more detail about those other areas.
Well, pathology is a branch of medicine concerned with the study and diagnosis of diseases. Anatomical pathologists generally work in hospitals, and they examine tissue that is removed from somebody. If you had a mole removed from your skin, you had a breast biopsy, or some tissue, from inside your body or part of an organ removed, this is examined by a pathologist who then tells your physician what the disease is and if it's there, the extent of the disease, and then he tells you what the diagnosis is. Pathologists are generally doctors. You won't contact them because your physician has contact with them, and that's an anatomical. The clinical pathologist is concerned with the laboratory studies done on patients in a hospital. If you've had a blood test, a urine test, all of those are done in clinical pathology laboratories. The forensic pathologist is concerned more with the application of the medical sciences to problems in the law. Most forensic pathologists function as medical examiners. That is, they determine the cause of death, what killed the person, and the manner of death, how it came about, in individuals who are thought to have died of violence, such as accidents, suicides, or homicides, or who've died suddenly and unexpectedly, and the exact cause of death is not known. At that time, they may elect to perform an autopsy to make such determinations. And then, based on the circumstances surrounding the death, the autopsy findings and tests done, they'll make a determination as to cause of death, what killed you, and manner of death, how it came about.
Let's talk for a moment about the professional positions that you've held following the training that you've outlined at this point.
I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble hearing you. I apologize. My ears are getting a little
Well,
less sensitive.
let me touch this and see if it's... I'm happy to speak up, Judge. I think I was facing away, but of course, if Dr. Di Maio prefers some assistance.
We can make him available in case you need some assistance.
Sure. Apparently, we don't have a PA system in the courtroom that amplifies my voice, so I'll just try to be more careful to speak up. And
Yes, sir.
So, following the training that you've outlined, would you please give us an idea then of the professional positions that you've held?
Yes, sir. After I completed my training, I went into the Army for 2 years. I was a major assigned to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C. It was on the Walter Reed campus. For the first year, I was chief of the medical legal section. For the second year, I was chief of the wound ballistics section. Following this, I moved to Dallas, Texas, was a medical examiner there from the summer of 1972 till the end of February in 1981. In 1981, I became chief medical examiner of Bexar County, Texas. And for the transcriber, Bexar is spelled B-E-X-A-R, the X is silent. So I was chief medical examiner there. The major city is San Antonio, which I'll give a plug. It's the 7th largest city in the United States, and a beautiful place to live. So I was chief medical examiner there from March 1st, 1981, until I retired December the 31st, 2006. For 16 of the years I was there, I was also in charge of the crime laboratory. I then retired and I went into the complete private practice of forensic pathologist, which I have been doing since then. I'm also the editor of the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology, which is an international journal of forensic medicine. And I'm chairman of the Texas Forensic Science Commission, which is a state agency charged with, I guess you could say, monitoring the practices of crime labs in the state of Texas.
Dr. Di Maio, you did mention that you were the director of the Bexar County Crime Lab for about 16 years. Could you expand on that a little bit? What was your role more specifically, and what did the lab do?
Well, essentially I established it. The police department had the crime lab. The county took over when I came there. It started out as just firearms and basic serology and document examination. And then we were one of the first laboratories west of Mississippi to establish a DNA laboratory. And it just does the usual things, you know, drug identification, DNA, trace evidence.
Did some of that work include knowing how to package evidence that may have biological or perhaps DNA evidence?
Well, yes, I mean that, but usually you just teach the forensic pathologists. They know that, because even if they have no association with a crime laboratory, that you have to, there's techniques for handling trace evidence, you know, in collection, establishing a chain of evidence, and packaging. So if you
Is it well known that there are certain certain requirements when you are packaging evidence that may contain biological samples, blood, other fluids that may have DNA that are wet?
Yes, you have to dry out the material and then package each item individually in paper. Because if you don't let it dry out, and especially if you put it in plastic containers, the bacteria just love that, and they begin multiplying, and then you get mold, and it just stinks to high heaven, and everything deteriorates.
So that's something that's well known in the forensic pathology community?
Oh yeah, that's standard practice.
It's been well known for a while?
Yeah, I'd say maybe about 30 years that I know of.
Back to the work that you have done with the group that monitors forensic labs. I think you said you were involved.
Oh, Texas Forensic Science Commission.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is that work, and what does that involve insofar as you and other pathologists?
Okay, essentially it's a government agency, and if there are problems, somebody thinks there's a problem with a crime laboratory, either an individual in it or the whole laboratory, whether their techniques or whether there's that somebody in the lab is doing something wrong, then it's reported to the state agency, and then we investigate it and then issue a report. Actually, most of the problems with the laboratories are actually reported by the laboratories themselves because they want the test to be done proper. So a lot more than half our investigations are laboratories reporting themselves that there's something wrong with them.
In addition to the professional positions that you've had and talked about, have you also had academic appointments?
Yes, with the University of Texas system, I started out as an assistant professor, then associate professor, and then I ended up as a full professor before I retired.
And in what subject matter, please?
Pathology, specifically forensic pathology.
Have you, in addition to your day-to-day work as a medical examiner and your work at the university as a professor in pathology, have you published any books or articles, scientific articles in the area of pathology?
Yes, I've published 88 articles in peer-reviewed journals, I think 13 book chapters, and then I've published 4 books. The first book was Gunshot Wounds, which I wrote myself, and it's been published in English, French, and Spanish. Then I wrote a book called Forensic Pathology with my father, who was chief medical examiner of New York City, and he's deceased now. And then the third book was a handbook of forensic pathology, which I wrote with one of my colleagues, Dr. Susanna Dana. And the fourth book is on what's called excited delirium syndrome, in which I wrote, well, the senior author, I'm the junior author of that book. The senior author of that book is my wife, who's a forensic nurse. And so we wrote that book on excited delirium syndrome. That's the last one we've written. So.
Let's talk for a moment about your work in gunshots. That was, I think you said, the first book that you wrote, and has it been updated over time?
There's been 2 editions published, and the 3rd edition is going to the publishers in another week or 2. This week kind of delayed it, but it's going in about 2 weeks, the 3rd edition.
Would you describe for the jury generally the purpose or the focus of that book, if it isn't otherwise self-explanatory by its title?
The book starts out instructing people about firearms, and then it talks about firearms wounds in general, then in rifles and handguns and shotguns, mentions things, how to do an autopsy, how to collect evidence, and what you can do with the analysis.
When you say gunshot wounds, are you talking about how a pathologist could, by looking at a gunshot wound, learn such things as the distance, perhaps, from which the shot was fired?
Right, whether it's a contact or near contact or loose contact or distant wound, range, nature of the weapon, you can tell by the wound in many cases, things like that. And how to describe it and how to document it.
Has that been the sort of work that you've been doing yourself virtually your entire career?
Yes, I have a very strong interest in gunshot wounds.
You also mentioned, Dr. Di Maio, that you've written, I think you said 13 chapters. I take that means in other people's books than your own.
That's correct, sir.
And how does that work? How would you come to write a chapter that someone else would include in one of their books?
They solicit me to write the chapter. You know, they say, would you please write a chapter on this and that in other books.
Are some of those books a more comprehensive look at forensic pathology than maybe what you wrote yourself in your gunshot wound book?
Well, I don't think so. Usually, it depends. The chapters are not all on gunshot wounds. Some of them are like excited delirium or other things as well. Nursing, investigation of nursing home deaths and such.
About how many of those chapters, if you recall, that you wrote for other people's books involved gunshot wounds?
I think about 7.
You also mentioned that you have authored or participated in about 88 peer-reviewed articles. Would you explain to the jury what is a peer-reviewed article?
Essentially, it's a scientific article that is submitted to a journal, and when the journal receives the article, they send it out for other people to review, to essentially give their opinion whether it should be published or not. So it's reviewed by other people, then it comes back to the main editor, and then the editor decides whether to publish or not.
Peers mean other pathologists?
Other pathologists, right.
And if the article is indeed published, does that make it available to other pathologists, other researchers who may want to refer to it in work they're doing, or to perhaps educate themselves as to the body of research out there in a particular subject area?
It is. We have kind of like a central, used to be you looked in the library, but now you go on the computers and you can get into a medical library, and they'll have the articles listed, and usually nowadays you can actually review the article on the computer. But these are, essentially it's a library. So it's, all these things are listed in certain indexes for physicians.
About how many of the articles that you have participated in writing involved gunshot wounds?
I think something like 35, 37, something like that.
Over the entire span of your career, you're talking about the peer review articles, the books, the chapters, and the research that you've done yourself? These events, these writings were developed over the time that you've worked as a forensic pathologist.
Right, over 40 years.
You mentioned that you had worked in Bexar County as the medical examiner from 1981 until the end of 2006. During that time, did you routinely perform autopsies?
Yes, I performed about 9,000 autopsies, and then I reviewed the autopsies that were done under my jurisdiction, and that was about another 27,000, 28,000. That meant I read the autopsies and said whether I agreed or not. And as I said, the 9,000, I did autopsies until October of the year that I retired.
Would you typically, if involved in a criminal case involving work that you had done, be called by the prosecution?
Yes. Yes. of course, when I was chief medical examiner, then I would testify in court about the autopsies I did, and the other doctors testified about the autopsies that they did.
Meaning that you had a staff of other forensic pathologists at your medical examiner's office that also performed autopsies?
I had 4 full-time physicians, plus I had 1 training position. Our office, my office, former office, was approved for a program to train fellows in the field of forensic pathology. There's about, I think, 38, 39 offices in the United States approved to train in forensic pathology.
During the time that you were there as a, for lack of a better term, a ballpark idea of how many autopsies the office would do in the course of a year?
Oh, we do 1,400 to 1,500 autopsies, I would say, and then we'd have about another equal number of 1,400 to 1,500 bodies that we elected not to do autopsies, just external exams.
And you would yourself perform autopsies throughout the time that you were there?
Right. I think the last autopsy I did was in October, and then I retired in December. You can't work to the last day because it takes weeks, if not a month or 2, to complete all the details of an autopsy. So you have to stop a couple of months before.
Since 1981, when you began your work at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office, were you also able to work as a consultant privately in other cases outside Bexar County?
Yes, sir.
And what kind of work would you do in that regard?
Mostly civil cases, and then a few criminal cases. Outside Bexar County, I could testify for the defense as well as for prosecution. So I did you don't do many private criminal cases, such as like what I'm doing now. I'd run about 2 to 4 years at most.
You have been working as a consultant since the beginning of 2007 then, if I've done the math correctly. I'm sorry, exclusively as a consultant, having retired from the medical examiner's office.
Since January of 2007.
In other words, you've been in private practice as a consultant since January of 2007.
Yes, sir.
And the majority of your work is in connection with civil cases?
Yes, sir.
Does that sometimes still include gunshot injuries, though?
Yes, usually it's cases, insurance cases involving alleged suicides, whether a case is suicide or not. Occasionally you'll get a case of accidental discharge to maybe a defect in the firearm.
You mentioned that you were in the military. Did you do any research when you were in the military?
Yeah, so that's when I started my firearms research. We did study the mechanisms of firearms and also review gunshot wound cases. We had with microflash and high-speed photography. You see pictures occasionally of like a gun going off and a bullet in the air or something. That's the type of photography we did. But we would shoot into ordnance gelatin to evaluate different types of ammunition and how effective it was. We also, when I was in charge of the wound ballistic section, I also had what was called the wound med study. And this was a study done in Vietnam, and photographs of individuals who had been injured or killed by different type weapons, and there was an attempt to study the effectiveness of these studies. It was very exciting. All I remember now, we had 50,000 35 millimeter slides in this, and then we had all the cases with it.
You mentioned microphotography and began to explain to the jury what a picture of a bullet leaving a gun would look like. Is that right?
Right, it's called microflash, and what it is it's kind of like, a flash that you have on your camera, and only this flash is very, very quick, and so when you could take photographs of things like moving through the air, bullets going through the air, 2,000, 3,000 feet per second. You can just kind of freeze them when the flash goes off.
So would you take a moment, please, and explain to the jury the mechanics of what happens when a bullet is fired from a gun, in terms of what comes out of the gun and when?
Okay. The firing pin hits the primer in the cartridge case. The primer detonates and sends a jet of flame through either one or two holes in the primer into the main body of the cartridge case, igniting the gunpowder. The gunpowder then begins to burn. It doesn't explode, it burns. And it's converted to gas. And then the pressure will be gradually to build up. Now, at the front of the cartridge case, you have the bullet, and that's kind of fixed in. So the pressure then begins to push against the bullet, to push it out of the cartridge case into the barrel, and then to be gripped by the rifling of the barrel. And it takes a while. It has to build up. Now, during this time, some gas will get around the bullet and will actually get in front of it. So now what you have is you have some of this gas in front of the bullet, then you have the bullet, and then you have the bulk of the gas. Now, the barrel of the gun, of course, is filled with air. And as the bullet goes down the barrel, it pushes the gas ahead of it, and it pushes the air. It's kind of like, a hydraulic system. So it pushes it out. So what happens is the first thing you get out of the gun, if you do microflash, you'll see it, you'll get a little cloud of gas, not very big, and then pretty soon after that, you get the bulk of the gas. It looks like a mushroom lying on its side, okay? And in that big gas cloud, there'll be a bullet, and there'll be unburnt or burning grains of powder. So it's gas, bullet, big gas cloud with powder grains, all coming out in that order.
Can the gas that comes out first, is that that's part of the firing process, combined, the burning material combined with the air that's in the barrel?
Well, it will to a certain degree, but that's mostly the larger cloud of gas. What happens is it's kind of like you have a column of gas and air being pushed straight ahead. So if you hold the gun against, say, like clothing, what happens is this column of gas and air tears a hole through the clothing. And then the bullet gets to the clothing, and then the gas with the soot gets to the clothing as well as the powder. And so that material, if it's in contact, all the thing after the hole is made goes through the hole and comes out the other side.
If I heard you correctly then, if the muzzle of the gun is against clothing, there will be a hole made in the clothing by the gas first.
And the air, right.
And the air, followed by the bullet, and then followed by the soot or the burning powder behind it.
Right. And that's why blanks, people think blank cartridges are dangerous, are not dangerous. You can kill yourself with them. If you take a gun with a blank cartridge and put it against your chest, the gas formed will just tear right through your skin and muscle into your lung. And people, kid around and they'll put it to their head, they're going to die. It goes right in. You don't need the bullet to kill you with contact wounds.
Let's continue, though, with some of your experience and some of your writings. Have you written any articles about head trauma in particular?
Yes, I wrote one peer-reviewed article, and then I've written a chapter in my book on forensic pathology on head injuries.
Head injuries meaning such thing as blunt force trauma to the head?
Right.
I think you mentioned that you also have served as an editor of peer-reviewed scientific journals?
Yes, I'm the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Forensic Medicine and Pathology.
Does that work include whether or not to accept a submission by a researcher for publication?
Yes, I have the final say. I receive the articles, they go out to reviewers, their reports come back to me, and then I read the reviews and decide whether to publish or not.
Let's talk about work that you may have done specifically for entities outside the Bexar County Medical Examiner. With reference to your expertise in firearms injuries particularly, have you done work for the United States government?
Yes, I think about two years ago, I testified for the U.S. Attorney's Office in some incidents in New Orleans during the Hurricane Katrina, where police officers shot and wounded a number of people and killed one person. And I testified for the U.S. Department of Justice in that case. And I've done like one or two other cases and such.
Have you done any work for the United States Marines?
War crimes, I testified for Marine Corps in the prosecution of individual charged with war crimes.
How about for the British government?
Pardon?
For the British government?
The Bloody Sunday massacre that happened in Belfast years and years ago, and I have another case going in about another 2 months in Britain, having to do with actually concussion, head injury. Yes.
As well, the United Nations?
Yes, Yugoslavia war crimes, reviewed the reports, the autopsies to determine whether they are valid or not.
And let's talk briefly about some of the jurisdictions in which you've testified as an expert in forensic pathology.
I testified in most states in the Union, state courts, federal courts. Testified in Canada, Colombia, South America, by video. I was able to testify, by the computer and everything. Let's see, South Africa, Israel.
I don't believe we've touched upon, and that's in the United States, in both state and federal courts?
Yes, sir.
Have you received some professional awards as well?
Yes, sir. From my medical school gave me the Master Teacher Award, and then I got some Outstanding Service Awards from the National Association of Medical Examiners, the Milton Halpern Award from the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and the Milton Halpern Laureate Award from the National Association of Medical Examiners.
Dr. Di Maio, is your professional background and your peer-reviewed articles, your books, and awards detailed with more specificity in your curriculum vitae?
Yes, they are.
I would like to approach the witness, please.
You may do so.
I'm handing you what's marked as Defendant's MM. If you take a look at it, please.
Yes, sir.
Is that your curriculum vitae?
Yes, sir, it is.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would offer then Defendant's MM as Defendant's next exhibit.
Any objections?
Approach the bench.
Yes, you may. Exhibit MM will come into evidence as Defense Exhibit 23.
Dr. Di Maio, let's turn to the work that you did specifically in this case.
Yes, sir.
Would you describe the materials that you have received for review in this case? And if you have notes reflecting some of that information that you want to refer to, you're welcome to do that. Copies have been provided to the state, but just feel free to use your notes if you wish.
Yes, sir. The material I reviewed were scene photos taken by the police and the medical examiner investigators, photographs of Mr. Zimmerman by the police and some civilians, the autopsy report, including toxicology and autopsy photos, the medical records of the EMS and a clinic regarding Mr. Zimmerman, a witness statement and a transcribed conversation given by Mr. John Good, 911 calls, a reenactment tape of the incident by Mr. Zimmerman, DNA reports, the firearm examiner reports, and the deposition of Dr. Rowe.
What I'd like to talk with you about in terms of your findings, well, let me ask you first. You did have an opportunity to review the video recording of Mr. Zimmerman, in a sense, reenacting the events immediately surrounding the shooting.
Yes, sir.
And you've had access to some witness statements.
Yes.
Have you, to your knowledge, reviewed all of the witness statements?
No, I haven't, because by the nature of this case, it's more about determining whether the physical evidence is consistent with Mr. Zimmerman's account of what he says happened, because the witness statements tend to be, in most cases, all around, vary greatly. So the easiest way to hear is to evaluate the physical evidence that you have on the body and the clothing and such, and then compare it to the statements of the defendant, in this case Mr. Zimmerman, and see whether they are consistent. If you say that the bullet came in the front and the bullet came in the back, well, obviously they're inconsistent. So that's what you're essentially doing in this case.
And in doing that in this case, would you look at, in addition to what Mr. Zimmerman said happened on the video reenactment, you would look at the forensic evidence, which includes the pictures from the autopsy that might show the gunshot wound?
Right.
Would that include looking at the report from the firearms expert who analyzed the clothing?
That's correct. The two most important things in this case are the autopsy report, including the photographs of the wound, and the reports by the firearms examiner. And then with a secondary, the scene photographs and such. But what you're looking at mostly is the autopsy and the very detailed and excellent report by the firearms examiner.
So would your analysis include, for example, trying to reach an opinion as to the distance between the end of the barrel and the skin?
Yes, sir.
Would it also include trying to reach an opinion from the end of the barrel to the clothing?
Yes, sir.
Trying to reach an opinion what effect, if any, the clothing may have had in the appearance of the wound on the skin, such
Yep.
things as that.
Yes, sir.
We'll talk about some of those details in a moment, but some of the things that I would also like to talk with you about today is your opinion of how long Trayvon Martin may have been alive, and also how long Trayvon Martin may have been conscious, if those are different opinions.
There are different opinions because you can be alive and unconscious. Right, they're two separate things.
We'll talk about that more. I also want to ask you some questions about the injuries that Mr. Zimmerman sustained that are reflected in the photographs taken by the Sanford Police Department. Did you have access to those photographs and the chance to review them?
Yes, sir, I did.
I'll also want to talk with you a little about the injuries that you observed through photographs or through reviewing the autopsy sustained by Trayvon Martin, in addition to the gunshot wound itself. So generally, that's the framework of what I'd like you to talk about today, and let's more specifically talk about the gunshot itself and the mechanics involved in that. I know you've already touched upon the mechanics of what happens when a bullet is fired from a gun, when you talked about the micro photography and that the puff of gas followed by the bullet followed by the rest of the gas is essentially the sequence.
Yes, sir.
So let's talk about the evidence in this case. Would you describe for the jury what you saw when you looked at the photographs of the clothing that Mr. Martin had and the photographs of the wound to his skin and the gunshot or the tattooing that was referenced in the autopsy report? Can you put all that together for us?
Yes, sir. The photographs show a contact discharge of the weapon against the clothing. And this I agree 100% with the firearms examiner, that at the time of discharge, the gun was against the clothing, the gas came out, tore the clothing, there's a defect and there's tears from it, there's deposit of soot all around it. And so what you know is that the muzzle was in contact with the clothing at the time of discharge. And again, this is what the firearms examiner said, and she also did, I believe, some experiments proving that. When you look at the wound in the chest, there's a different picture. The wound in the chest was about 1 inch to the left of the midline, 1/2 inch below the level of the nipples. And what you had was a circular punched out wound, which is an entrance, but it lay in an area of powder tattooing measuring 2 inches by 2 inches. Now, powder tattooing are marks on the skin due to powder grains that come out the muzzle of the gun. They're not powder burns. People use the term powder burns, but it means a whole bunch of different things. This is very specific. When the powder grain comes out of the barrel and the barrel is close enough to the body, that grain of powder hits the skin and produces a mark and a reaction, a reddish color reaction. And these marks are called powder tattoo marks. Some people call them, use other terms, but the powder tattoo marks. They use the term stippling, but I prefer powder tattoo marks. And this indicates that a grain of powder has hit the skin and the person was alive at the time. You do not get true powder tattoo marks in dead people. And there was a distribution measuring 2 inches by 2 inches and a certain density in these tattoo marks. And this indicated that the gun was not against the skin. It was not 1/2 inch away. It was more than 1 inch. And based upon the concentration of the marks and the size of the pattern, it's my opinion that the muzzle of the gun in this case was 2 to 4 inches away from the skin. So the barrel of the gun was against the clothing. The muzzle of the gun was against the clothing, but the clothing itself had to be 2 to 4 inches away from the body at the time Mr. Martin was shot.
Dr. Di Maio, I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 96, which is a photograph taken at the medical examiner's office showing the entrance wound. It may take a minute to warm this up, so let me, if I might, approach the witness, and perhaps you could point out what you're saying to the jury.
Yes, sir. May. If you look, what you see is the hole produced by the bullet. And that's essentially a punched out type entrance. And then all around the entrance, you see these all little marks, almost like flea bites or ant bites, not fire ants, but regular ants. Little bite marks all around, and these are powder tattoo marks. And because they're red and reddish brown, that indicates the person was alive. And if you notice, there's a variation in the density, and there's a measurement of about 2 inches by 2 inches, according to the autopsy report. This indicates, again, that he was alive at the time he was shot, and that the muzzle was not in contact, but had to be back. The first time you see powder tattoo marks is when the muzzle is a ½ inch away. Less than ½ inch, you don't see tattoo marks. And then as you begin to move the barrel away, the area of tattooing begins to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then as it increases in range, your density will decrease. This is a fairly heavy density, so you know it's less than 6 inches and such. And the density decreases until finally the tattoo marks disappear. This is ball powder, most probably flattened ball. It would disappear from bare skin at about 3 feet. But by the size, the density, this is close, somewhere between 2 and 4 inches.
Your opinion as to the distance is based upon your training and research?
Yeah, I've done a lot of research in powder tattooing and whether you can make valid judgments as to range. That is, what firearms examiners will do is they'll use, like, usually heavy white paper, and they'll fire the gun, and they get a hole, and then they get marks around it. And then by the size of the pattern and the density, they'll give an opinion as to the range. Well, this has been used for 75, 80 years to make judgments. But the problem was, does it really reflect what happens on the skin? And I got curious about that, so I decided to make a determination. And I did experiments, and you have to use living animals to do it. And based on the experiments, I found out, yes, it's valid. To determine the size of the pattern by shooting against, like, white paper is valid out to at least 18 inches. So I got interested in there, and then I did terminations of powder tattooing from handguns and rifles and shotguns, and how far it extends, and how different types of powder make such a determination. This is a ball powder variant, so it actually, there's a lot more grains in a cartridge loaded with with ball powder, so you have a denser pattern. And because of the configuration of the grains of powder, they actually go out further. So, and I know it's ball powder because the firearms examiner states that in her report.
Dr. Di Maio, the exhibit you just published to the jury is now on the screen. The detail may not be as good as on the photograph itself, but that's in evidence the jury can review later. This is what you described as the 2-inch by 2-inch tattooing pattern.
Yes, sir.
Is that what helps you be more precise about the distance than just the 1/2 inch where you said it can't be less than a 1/2 inch, or the beyond 18 inches or several feet where you know the powder would have dropped off?
Right. The thing is that if it's less than 1/2 inch, you would see a hole surrounded by dense soot, and you would not see individual powder tattoo marks. Powder tattoo marks begin at about, in the metric system, 10 millimeters. It's about 1/2 inch. And then begins the pattern gets broader and broader.
How does, sorry for interrupting, how does the pattern get broader as the distance increases?
It's kind of like with a hose, when you have that spray coming out, the cone shape, and, the farther you get from the end of the hose, the bigger the spray pattern. And so it's like that. And, but of course what happens is just like the hose, after a while, the water droplets just fall off. And you can spray so far. Well, it's the same thing with the powder. After a certain distance, it loses its velocity and just falls away.
Would the clothing, it's not disputed in this case that there was clothing in between the end of the muzzle and the skin. In fact, we have the shirts here in the courtroom, if it would assist in your testimony with the jury. But the question is, what effect, if any, would the clothing being in between have on the appearance of the wound itself on the skin?
In this case, none, because the clothing was not between the powder and the skin at the time of discharge, because there was a hole there produced by the gas and the bullet. So don't forget, the powder is behind the bullet. So the gas tears open the cloth, and the bullet makes sure there's a hole there. And then the powder comes through there. So now if you had, the gun will say 6 inches away from the clothing, you'll have just a little hole. The clothing will filter out the powder to a degree. But in this case, clothing didn't filter out the powder because the clothing wasn't there. You had a hole there. And you had the muzzle against the body, and so everything coming out the muzzle was going through the hole.
If the muzzle of the gun had been pressed into Trayvon Martin's chest, even with the clothing in between, what would you see differently than what you see here?
You would see a hole like that, and it would be surrounded by a halo of black soot, and maybe on the skin a grain or two of powder. But you wouldn't see powder tattooing. Because what the clothing would do is it disperses the soot. It doesn't disperse the powder. The powder would be inside the body.
From a medical examiner standpoint, with your training and experience, literally having written the book, is this a hard call for you?
No. This is basic, 101.
Let's talk for a moment, if we might, about the trajectory of the bullet itself. Having reviewed the medical examiner's report, included the photographs, I take it, that were available of the internal examination?
No, there weren't photographs of the internal examination. There was an X-ray, which is actually better because organs shift around.
Let's talk about the Well, reference the x-ray if you wish. That's in evidence too,
Right.
somewhere in this stack. But also that you know the path of the bullet through the right ventricle and into the lower left lung.
Right. What the autopsy describes.
I'm
is-
sorry, the lower right lung. I'm sorry.
What the autopsy describes is a bullet hole in the left chest, as I said, an inch to the left of the midline. It goes through what's called the fifth intercostal space. That is, between your ribs you have spaces. Fifth intercostal space is the space between your fifth rib and your sixth rib. So it went through there, and then it hit the sac surrounding the heart, went through the right ventricle of the heart, in and out, and then it went into the right lung. And when you look at the x-ray, you can see the lead core of the bullet in sort of the center, and then you see the jacket fragments on the right side of the chest. So the bullet really went from the deceased's front to his back and from his left to his right, because it went into the right lung. And it started out on the left side.
Meaning there must have been, based upon your review of the description of the autopsy, must have been at least a slight left to right trajectory.
Yes, there's some. I can't really quantitate it, but there's some. It doesn't appear radical, but that the bullet was going from Mr. Martin's left to his right.
I wanted to point that out, that left to right, meaning from Mr. Martin's left toward Mr. Martin's right.
So that's correct. There's a standard way of describing wounds. And when you describe wounds and when you talk left to right, up and down, you're talking from the deceased's viewpoint, not from you looking at him. So whenever I would say like front to back, it means Mr. Martin's front to his back, his left to his right.
In other words, it was not precisely a straight-on shot.
No, it does not appear so.
Let's talk for a moment about the mechanics of that shot, putting together the defect on the clothing. That's a result of contact with the muzzle. That you believe that the distance between the clothing and the skin was somewhere between 2 and 4 inches, not a contact. Your understanding of Mr. Zimmerman's statement because of the video reenactment. Your work, essentially, your task was to determine whether the medical evidence was consistent with what Mr. Zimmerman said happened. Is that a good
That's
summary?
correct, sir.
Okay. Let's talk about that for a moment. First of all, were you aware that Mr. Zimmerman said that Trayvon Martin was straddling him
Yes, sir.
and leaning over him,
Yes, sir.
and that Mr. Zimmerman had the gun in his right hand?
Yes, sir.
And if you would describe then what you know about that sequence of events compared with the medical, forensic, and gunshot evidence.
The medical evidence, the gunshot wound, the tattooing, is consistent with his opinion, with his statement as to that. And the reason it is don't forget, the simplest thing is the gun was in his right hand. So if you're going to shoot somebody and you're right-handed and you're really close to them, there's the natural inclination to, with the twist, the hand, that the bullet will tend to go from the deceased's left to his right, okay? But that's a minor point. The most important point is the nature of the defect in the clothing and the powder tattooing. That is, if you lean over somebody, you will notice that the clothing tends to fall away from the chest. If instead you're lying on your back and somebody shoots you, the clothing is going to be against your chest. So that the fact that we know the clothing was 2 to 4 inches away is consistent with somebody leaning over the person doing the shooting, and that the clothing is 2 to 4 inches away from the person firing.
You may consider, in your opinion as well, that the clothing was wet. Mr. Martin's shirt was described as being damp, that it had been raining that night, and that when it was photographed at the medical examiner's office the next day, it was obviously wet in places. You may also consider that the responding officers found an unopened can of a beverage in the front pouch of Mr. Martin's hooded sweatshirt. This is in evidence as Exhibit 148, an unopened 23-ounce can of a fruit beverage.
Yes.
Do you find those facts consistent with what you saw, as well as consistent with what Mr. Zimmerman said happened?
This would tend to reinforce, because the reason that the clothing, as you bend forward, the clothing falls away from the body is gravity. Now, if you have wet clothing, clothing's heavier, and there's going to be a greater tendency to fall. And if you have something in the front pulling the shirt down as you lean over, again, it tends to pull away from the body. So the wound itself, by the gap, by the powder tattooing, in the face of contact of the clothing, indicates that this is consistent with Mr. Zimmerman's account that Mr. Martin was over him, leaning forward at the time he was shot.
Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about Trayvon Martin's, the mechanics of the effect on Trayvon Martin receiving that shot, in terms of how long you believe he would have survived and how long within that time you believe he may have been conscious, and further, what, if anything, he could do voluntarily during the time he was conscious, whether he could talk or move or be physically active. Do you follow me?
Yes, there are three questions that you brought up. Number one is the ability to move. That is determined by the amount of oxygen in your brain, for which you have a reserve of 10 to 15 seconds. So even if I, right now, reached across, put my hand through your chest, grabbed your heart, and ripped it out, you could stand there and talk to me for 10 to 15 seconds, or walk over to me, because the thing that's controlling your movement and ability to speak is the brain. And that has a reserve supply of 10 to 15 seconds. Now, that's minimum. That assumes no blood is going to the brain. If you get some more blood going to the brain, that could be longer, okay? It's going to depend on blood pressure and how severe your wound. The other thing is, and I know the answer is kind of getting complicated, not being simple, is that some people get shot and immediately collapse. Some people get shot, don't even know they've been shot, so they can function. So what I'm saying is minimum is 10 to 15 seconds. That's a given, okay? Now, how long can your heart beat? Because I'm using for time of death cardiac, not brain. That's not relevant here. Okay, cardiac. In this case, you have a through and through hole of the right ventricle, and then you have at least one hole, if not two, into the right lung. So you're losing blood. And every time the heart contracts, it pumps blood out the two holes in the ventricle and at least one hole in the lung. So you're losing blood. If you engage in a struggle, which is what was supposed to have happened, your heart rate increases. Mr. Martin was a healthy young man. If he's involved in a struggle, you expect his heart to be beating, especially after he gets shot, more than 100 times a minute. You know, healthy people, 120 in a struggle, it's no big deal. Now, remember, every time the heart beats, out comes the blood. Now, if he loses, say he's only beating 100, which is relatively slow. If he loses 15, if he loses, okay, we got the three things. Say he loses a tablespoon of blood every time the heart beats, which is, well, you got two big holes in the heart. So if you lose that tablespoon, that's not that much blood. That's 15 cc's. The heart's beating 100. You're losing 1,500 cc's in a minute. That's about a quarter of his blood supply. And a second minute, if you consume the same rate, actually the heart would probably be beating faster for the second minute. He's going to lose another 1,500. Well, that means he's lost more than 50% of his blood supply very suddenly. It's not just the loss of blood. At that point, he's not pumping any sufficient blood to the heart, to the brain, or anywhere else, and he's reached a point where he's going to die. So, assuming these conditions, in all probability, nothing's 100%, he's going to be dead within 1 to 3 minutes after being shot, in this case. Now, all I'm talking about is heart effectively pumping blood. Now, you can still get some electrical activity, but you're not pumping. And this is in all probability. So, how long was he conscious? Significantly shorter than the time necessary to die, because you wouldn't have sufficient oxygen getting to the brain. I can't tell you exactly how long he could be conscious. I can tell you the minimum, 10 to 15, unless psychologically he just blacks out. So that's the best you can give in estimates.
Dr. Di Maio, in your training and experience and research, are you familiar with incidents where individuals received a similar or even more serious injury than you see that Trayvon Martin sustained and could still talk, move, do voluntary actions for that 10 to 15 seconds?
Oh, yes. Best case I have, speaking like a forensic pathologist, is an individual shot in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun at point-blank range. His heart was completely shredded. He turned around and then ran around 65, 75 feet before he collapsed.
Does the fact of being shot in the heart itself mean anything other than it has an accelerated loss of blood and that it will quickly deplete the oxygen to the brain because of the loss of circulating blood?
No, nothing else than that.
It doesn't cause the same kind of physical response as being shot in the head, for example.
Right. It's that some of the SWAT teams, if they want to immobilize somebody immediately, what you have to do is you have to shoot them in the head. They know it.
from what I understand you to say, then, for at least 10 to 15 seconds after Mr. Martin sustained the shot, he would have been capable of talking and of voluntary movement.
He could, right. Some people just lose consciousness immediately. It's psychological, it's not physical. But he has the potential for 10 to 15 seconds minimum, right?
Which could include then moving his arms from an outstretched position to underneath his body.
Sustained.
Could that include moving his arms from an outreached position to underneath his body during that 10 to 15 seconds?
Yes.
At the time that one loses consciousness, I take it they then lose the ability for voluntary movement?
Oh, yeah. Once you're unconscious, you don't have voluntary movement.
And you would not be feeling pain?
That's correct, sir.
Let's talk for a moment about the injury to Trayvon Martin's knuckle. You remember there being in the photographs and a discussion in the autopsy, an abrasion on the left hand fourth finger?
Right, 1/4 by 1/8 of an inch abrasion, straight.
Do you agree with Dr. Bao that that's an abrasion type injury?
It appears to be.
Is that consistent with having come in contact with a hard surface or impacting some other surface?
It's consistent with impacting a hard surface.
Would concrete qualify?
Concrete could qualify, yes, sir.
In your training and experience under circumstances like this, would you expect to see bruising on the knuckles if there had been punching going on?
You can see bruising or you cannot see bruising. It depends what part of the body you punch. You know, the softer the portion, you may not see it. And then, in a case like this, you can have bruising, but it may not be visible unless you cut open the hand, you know, the skin, and peel it back. So there may have been bruising there that we don't know about, or there may not have been bruising, but it doesn't make that much difference. You can punch someone and not get bruises, and punch someone and get bruises. It's just too variable.
Does it take blood pressure in order to get bruising?
Yes. Once your blood pressure goes, then you don't have bruising. That's why they say you can't bruise a dead body. No blood pressure. The bruising occurs when the blood pressure forces the blood out of the torn blood vessels into the soft tissue.
And in this instance, Mr. Martin lost blood pressure very quickly.
Yes, sir.
So had Dr. Bao been looking for bruising, especially in the areas of the knuckles, the better course or the better practice would have been to take a look internally.
Right, to cut. The funeral director repairs it without any problem.
As far as you know, that was not done in this case.
That's correct, sir.
Let's then move, if we might, to the injuries that George Zimmerman sustained.
Yes, sir.
You've been provided photographs that were taken at the scene of his bloody nose. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And a photograph that was taken of the back of his head showing some streaming blood.
Yes, sir.
And were you also provided with copies of the photographs that were taken later that night, some 4.5 hours later, by the Sanford Police Department.
Yes.
Let's talk then a little about head trauma. Let's talk about the mechanisms or the mechanics of blunt force injury to the head.
Yes, sir.
What happens when somebody's hit in the head, either by a fist or has their head impacted against a hard surface like concrete?
Well, okay. What'll happen is the head will move. We'll say the head's fixed, and then all of a sudden it's made to move, or it's moving, hits, and stops suddenly. It works the same way. The brain will shift. The brain is kind of like gelatin, and it will move back and forth inside the cranial cavity. And as it moves back and forth, there's three possibilities. One, you get bruising by impacting the bone inside. The brain can come back and hit the bone so hard you get bruising. Or, a variant of it, you get bleeding. You can get what's called subarachnoid hemorrhage or subdural hemorrhage. So you can get intracranial hemorrhage. And if the intracranial hemorrhage is sufficient enough, it can kill you. The other type of injury you can get to the brain is axonal injury. The brain is a mass of brain cells, and they're all connected together, and the connection in part is through fibers called axons that run from one cell to another cell, and it passes down certain chemicals which activate the cells. Now the axons, as I said, are elongated, run from cell to cell. When the brain moves, of course, back and forth due to impacts, the axons will be stretched to a certain degree. Within limited motion, the way we are walking around and such, or even bumping your head, it's no big deal because the axons can take that. If the movement is very violent, it stretches the axons, and this causes injury to the wall. If the movement, which is more violent, is relatively mild, the injury is repaired by the axon, and there's no problem. And then there's a gradual increase in force until you get something like an automobile accident where, you run into something and your head goes forward and hits the panel. That force is so great that it will injure these axons and they will not be able to be repaired, and they die. Now, luckily, you have a lot of brain cells and a lot of connections, so you can lose a good number of brain cells and still be all right. But at some point, you will have impairment, and at some point, you're going to die. So impacts of the head with its hard surface like concrete, we'll say, what you worry about is the intracranial bleeding and some axonal injury. More likely the intracranial bleeding than axonal injury, to be honest. And so it's always dangerous. The thing is, it's like if you hit your head here on the floor, it's carpet that absorbs. Concrete doesn't yield. When your head hits concrete, your head yields, not the concrete. So it's dangerous. Could you kill somebody? Sure, if you bang them hard enough. But even if you don't do enough to injure the brain significantly, you're going to have some stunning effect. That's what concussion, these football players who get the concussion. What it is it's axonal injury. And, you know, some can take it, some can't. Sometimes there's sequelae down the line. But you can get very mild concussion, just bang your, not just banging your head on a cabinet, that doesn't do it. But I mean, you know, you fall and you hit your head, and you can get a mild concussion. You don't lose consciousness, you just appear stunned. I know this is not a medical term, but it's like stunning goes to concussion, goes to getting worse. I think the best thing is stunned, where you may not have any significant physical injury to the brain, but you are stunned just from the impact. Stunning is a good term. It's better than concussion.
You're suggesting it's a progression depending on how hard the impact is and perhaps how susceptible the person is to it?
Yes, and how many times, you know, it is, and how much force is used. But at least you're gonna, if you get, your head hits something unyielding on concrete with sufficient force to tear the scalp, you are going to be, at a minimum, stunned. And then it could be much worse than that. But you're going to be stunned. Because the thing is, we all hit our heads all the time, and how often do you get a scalp laceration? It's not that common. Even in people who have their hair cropped, or, like a lot of people in this courtroom, are bald. You know, that removes a little of the cushion. But, you know, the thing is when you have lacerations, you know, there's some trauma.
Dr. Di Maio, you were talking specifically about lacerations to the scalp. I know that you've received the photographs and reviewed the evidence that George Zimmerman had 2 lacerations to the back of his head. If I might have the lights for a moment, Your Honor, I'd like to show State's Exhibit 76. This has been identified as the photograph. Is there maybe another button to push?
The clerk is doing that. Cycle down for a moment.
I'll hold it up for you in the meantime. This has been identified as State's 76, the very first photo taken of George Zimmerman that night by Jonathan Manalo. You've seen this before?
Yes, sir.
Does this evidence some bleeding to the back of the head?
Yes, so there's 2 sites of bleeding, you can say,
Two wound sites, if you will.
where you're bleeding, right. A laceration, it's a tear in the skin.
I'll stick that here on the projector, just as a frame of reference. Okay, that's the first picture. And then you later saw pictures where some of the blood had been wiped away.
Right.
Let's take a look for a moment at 74. And how well that can be seen, maybe not so great. What do you see in this picture in terms of evidence of injury?
It looks like you've got a bruise on the left side. It's not really a very good photograph.
Let me see if I can find one that may be a little bit better. These are all in evidence, so the jury can review them at their leisure, but they aren't in sequential order, so I'm struggling here a bit. Let me see if I can find it easily. If not, we will move on. No, I think we're stuck with this one for the moment. Do you see in this photograph what looks like 2 separate areas of swelling?
Yes, if you look in between, you can see There's an injury at, let's see, if you look at the head, say at,
I have a pointer if that would help.
yes.
It's the top button. That's a better picture.
There's an injury here and here, which are probably represent the lacerations, since it looks like clotted blood. But if you look right in between, there's kind of a valley. And the reason is that this impact site is swollen. And then this is swollen here. So this is not swollen. So you know that there are two separate impacts. One impact here, producing two separate lacerations with an area in between that is not swollen. And the swollen is due to just a bleeding under the scalp. That's what it is.
The knot or the lump that people get after hitting their head on something hard is blood as opposed to some other fluid?
It's blood, right. It's
Talk for a moment, if
the
you
medical
would.
term is hematoma, but not is, I guess, non-medical acceptable.
Talk for a moment, Dr. Di Maio, if you would, about the curvature of the head and why you're confident that's two separate impacts as opposed to one impact that could have caused all of the injuries that you see?
Oh, well, okay, it's real simple. You've got an unyielding surface, so when the circular area hits it, it's going to flatten at the point of contact. And it's not going to flatten 3 inches on the other side. You have to move it over. And on top of that, you can see if it was one impact, it would be swollen between the two. But here you've got 2 areas of swelling, so they're separate.
You commented earlier that it's not that easy to get a laceration from impacting on a flat, solid object.
Yeah, because it takes sufficient force. I mean, everyone bangs their head and has fallen and hit their head. You don't get lacerations.
What's the mechanism by which the laceration occurs, where the skin is split in some way?
There's 2 ways that you can get a laceration. One is if it's a direct perpendicular impact, you just crush the skin. And as you crush it, you push it away from the point of impact, and you get a tear. The other is if you hit it at an angle such that you bang it and slide, the the surface holds one edge, and the rest of the moving head pulls against that, and so you tear. A laceration is nothing but a tear.
Here's the picture I was looking for. Let me substitute this. This is Exhibit 57, and see if there's anything else here that more clearly shows what you were talking about.
Yeah, again, when I was, you can see that there's a swelling here, and there's like a little valley here, and it's swollen here, and then it's swollen here, and there's a laceration here, and this is a blood clot over a laceration. One of the lacerations is almost an inch, and the other one is like 1/5 of an inch. But the wounds aren't cleaned up when they took the photograph, so you can't say which is which.
Is the laceration itself a significant injury?
In this case, well, just that it's a marker of force. In theory, if you get a real bad laceration, rarely, I've seen it maybe twice, people have actually bled to death from lacerations of the scalp, but not like this type of laceration.
When you say it's a marker of force, are you saying that it represents something other than just the actual injury itself?
Right, it indicates that you've had severe force because You know, it's not like you just bump your head or something like that.
Would it be possible to have your head struck on something hard enough to ring the bell or stun you that wouldn't actually leave a mark visible some hours later on the outside of the scalp?
Oh, sure. You see that a lot in abused children, where there's not a mark on their head, and then you get inside, they've even got skull fractures. So you can get severe trauma to the head without external injury, actually. That's why they're always doing CT scans, you know, when you have head trauma.
So the presence of the injury on the outside, are you saying doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't additional impact, or that the impact itself was minor?
Okay. What I'm saying is that you can get severe head trauma, but actually without any marks on the head. Or you can get marks, lacerations and contusions, and have head trauma. They're not necessarily, you know, more commonly when you get severe head trauma, you have some injury to the scalp. But you can get severe head trauma without a mark on the scalp, too.
Sort of gauging the amount of force necessary to cause those injuries alone, would that be enough force, in your opinion, to cause this stunning effect that you talked about?
Oh, yes. Anyone who's ever had a real bang on the head knows you don't have to have a laceration or a big bruise to be, you know, it's a transient type of thing, maybe 5-10 seconds, you know, you're kind of stunned. That's why that's a good term to use. Medically, the doctors would refer to it as an ultra mild concussion, but stunning would be a better thing, because people experience that, you know, when they hit their heads, and they understand it, and it's not really of that much significance neurologically.
If you sustained a stunning blow like this, and then you continued to receive additional blows to the head, would the additional blows continue to cause this stunning effect?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So it may compound in a way?
Yes, it's actually, if you get a concussion, even if it's mild, and then you, within a short period of time, get multiple other concussions, people have died. That's the, you know, Friday night football, where they get it 1 week, and then they get another one the next week, and they'll collapse and die. It's a recognized syndrome.
So in other words, these impacts could be cumulative just that night into multiple stunning effects, ultimately leading to a concussion?
Oh, yeah. Well, they probably, by stunning, I'm using the term stunning, and I know any physicians listening to me are cringing, because essentially it's what it is. It's a very mild concussion. But stunning is kind of more, it's not an incapacitating thing. You're not knocked out. As anyone who's ever fallen and hit their head hard knows what I'm talking about, the stunning effect. But it's, you know, you hit your head hard, you understand what it means.
There has been some discussion in the testimony about punctate abrasions.
Yes, sir.
Let me show you Exhibit 66. Are there punctate abrasions evident in this photo?
They're right here. It's kind of washed out with the photograph. But you can see, you know, little reddish markings, and that indicates that there was impact with a surface, a flat surface, that was not really smooth, like this wood here. If you hit your head on this wood here, you would not get punctate. You'd have to get something with a little non-flat surface, you know, little edge to it.
Would concrete of the nature that's used in your everyday sidewalk have that kind of surface?
Yes, sir.
Is this injury consistent with Mr. Zimmerman's head having impacted a sidewalk?
Yes, sir.
There is some We were just checking to see if you care for some water. If you do,
Oh,
just...
no.
The punctate abrasion is that sort of granular-looking red stuff around the temple?
Right, it's not smooth. It's an area red here, and then a little here, and 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 a little here, that sort of thing.
There appears to be a noticeable lump or knot a little higher up.
Right, over here.
Does that appear to be a consequence of the impact?
Right.
What would
Again,
you, how would you describe that?
A knot? No, hematoma, it's bleeding underneath the scalp.
Do you think it's likely associated with the impact that caused the punctate abrasions?
Yes, sir.
Could that then be those injuries caused by one or more impacts with the sidewalk?
Yes, sir.
Let me show you State's Exhibit 70, a view of the right side of Mr. Zimmerman's head, I believe. Do you see anything here that would suggest impact with a fist or the sidewalk?
You can start to see this was that punctate, and there's a little lesion over there. It's not a good photograph, unfortunately, so. But again, it's consistent with some impact of some sort.
This is another photo of the same side. This is in evidence as 71. Slightly different angle.
You can see it, here's the injury. It goes here, you can see the reddish areas.
Let's take a look at the other side of the head, on the left side in Exhibit 73. If I might take a moment, Your Honor, and approach the witness so the witness can see the actual photograph.
Oh, I can see.
Okay.
There's no problem.
What do you see in this photograph, Dr. Di Maio, that's consistent with blunt force trauma?
Again, you see, this is a washed out photograph, but there's an area, there are marks right over here too. I would assume a print photograph would show it better, but there's some punctate marks over here.
May I approach the witness just briefly, and then I'll return,
Yes, you may.
just to show you this photograph itself. Exhibit 73.
If you see better in this what was on the projector, could you point that out to the jury?
Yes, if you look right here, you can see an arc of punctate abrasions, and then kind of a palette area, and then another arc right over here.
Do you see signs or evidence of a hematoma, bruising of some sort?
There's suggestion, but it's not as distinct as on the other side.
Thank you. Let me approach one more time. I'd like to direct your attention, though, Doctor, to this area above the ear.
That's the area I'm saying that looks like it's swollen in that area, but it's hard to say definitely.
I see. That's consistent with swelling as a result of blunt force trauma?
Yes, sir.
That area is this general area here?
Right.
Dr. Di Maio, you have seen Exhibit 79, the first photograph taken at the scene of Mr. Zimmerman's face.
Yes, sir.
And what signs of trauma do you see in this picture?
Well, you have to look at the original, but if you do, this appears bruised. But if you look at the outline of the nose here, and it shows up, and there's swelling here, a little abrasion there.
Is this a better picture?
Yes.
Maybe I could approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Okay. If you look at this, you can see there's congestion in the nose and there's an abrasion. But notice how the outline here is a smooth outline. Here, it bulges out and then comes back. And if you then compare it to another photograph, you see that this is consistent with a possible displaced fracture, because of the next photo taken of him in police custody, the swell, which is only a few hours later, this swelling is not as prominent. And that's why I believe the EMS thought he had a fractured nose. And you can see there's a swelling right here. It's very prominent. It's just below the area where he's got a small abrasion.
Is the injury you see in this exhibit consistent, this exhibit 79, consistent with having been punched in the nose?
Yes, sir.
This is exhibit 48. We'll put it on the projector and see if you can find the detail. This is represented as the photograph taken several hours later at the police department of Mr. Zimmerman's face.
Right.
Can you point out to the jury what you were referring to?
If you look now at him, notice that swelling appears to be gone. Well, if you get, it can't be gone if it's just blood. So this is strongly suggestive of the fact that what he had was a kind of a displaced fracture here, and that when he was maybe examined by the EMS or something, they just pushed it back in, either consciously or unconsciously. And so now it's just in place, and it's being held there by the muscle.
Either way, whether or not the fracture was displaced or not, or even fractured, does the trauma that you see in that photograph and this photograph consistent with having been struck hard in the face?
Right. And so it's there. And then, of course, there's another blow here.
I will show you 72, taken that same evening, to see if that illustrates some of the other injuries you observed. Is that the part of the forehead you were talking about?
Right. It's again another one of these washed out photographs, but let me see. You can vaguely see there's like a line here, and then there's another, and when you look at the prints, they're reddish markings. You can see this is linear right here, see? Line. And then, this is a crease in the forehead. I'm talking about this coming down. And then right over here. And those are, if you look at a better photograph, there are reddish areas. It's not consistent with concrete. It's consistent with something more like a punch than concrete. So this would, because what you've got is, if you look at it, the skin is intact. The injury is underneath the skin, this reddish mark.
Something that doesn't wash off.
Yeah, oh no, this doesn't wash off because it's on multiple photographs. But I mean, it's not blood, but I mean, it's underneath the skin. But it's not from something like concrete or anything like that.
Would it likely be a different impact than the one that caused the injury to the nose itself?
Yes, it's too far down, and it's not the same thing.
In the photograph, if you look more to the right, I'll put the pen on it for a second as you describe the photos being washed out. Do you see some evidence there of some mark of some sort?
Right, this is it. There's a mark like this, and then there's a mark here. I have a photograph of myself, which is not entered into evidence, so
It's the same picture, is it
it's
not?
the same picture, but it's kind of, this thing's washed out. So you should have a picture in evidence.
Yes, that's Exhibit 72. I'm showing it to you here now. This is the picture in evidence. So there's a separate red mark on the forehead that you're pointing out now that may suggest additional impact?
No, I think this and this are the same impact. I think you have 6 identifiable injuries. The 2 lacerations on the back of the head, the impacts in both temple regions, that's 4. The nose is 5, and the forehead is 6. And there may be others, but the photographs are not of the quality that you can say.
May there also have been impacts that, for one reason or another, may have landed but didn't actually manifest itself in a visible injury.
Right. And
Speculation.
Sustained.
In a fight situation where someone may be resisting the attack by someone else, would you expect them, for example, as they are being pushed toward the concrete, to resist by their muscles or their back trying to sit up, for example?
I would assume so.
So, consistent with what you see here, is it possible there may have been other impacts, but they weren't so pronounced because there was some ability to actually resist the full force of the impact?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Yes, I told you that, also in addition, the head wasn't cleaned of blood in some of the photographs. All I can say is there's definite evidence of 6 impacts. That does not mean that there were only 6, but the 6 I can say.
You have just a moment. Thank you, Your Honor. Tender the witness.
Yes, you may. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for lunch. During the lunch hour, you're not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anybody else. You're not to read or listen to any radio, television, or newspaper reports about the case. You're not to use any kind of an electronic device to do independent research about the case, people, places, things, or terminology. And you're not to read or create any emails, text messages, Twitters, tweets, blogs, or social networking pages about the case. Do I have your assurances that you will abide by these instructions? Thank you, and if you'll put your notepads face down and follow Deputy Jarvis, we'll be in recess till 1:30. Di Maio, you're free to take your lunch break and be back at 1:30, but you cannot discuss your testimony with anybody, including the lawyers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Court will be in recess until 1:30.
Thank you, Dr. Di Maio.
don't think he'll have time to go to the courthouse, and he doesn't have a car.
Then fine.